You are listening to the Tuesday Afternoon Apocalypse. Book 1 of the Accidental Dungeon Lord series. Written by I.T. Grimsworth. Narrated by Andrew Edge. This is an unabridged recording. Chapter 1. The Tuesday Afternoon Apocalypse. The Tuesday in question started exactly the way every other Tuesday in Gerald Fitch's adult life had started, with a microwave burrito, a vaguely threatening email from his boss, and the quiet, simmering realization that he had somehow become a person who owned a deeply ironic gym membership. He was 28 years old. He worked the IT help desk for a mid-sized insurance company called Northwestern Brokers Mutual, which was three nouns in search of a purpose. His job consisted mostly of telling people to turn things off and then turn them back on again, a skill his mother insisted was a gift and which he insisted was the bare minimum required to operate a toaster. He lived in apartment 7 Alpha of the Petrocelli Arms, a beige brick building in a part of town that real estate listings described as up-and-coming and actual residents described as, "Please don't steal my catalytic converter." The burrito was mediocre. The coffee was from a novelty mug, world's okayest dungeon lord, a gift from a coworker who thought it was hilarious, and it was the only part of this morning that felt right. The email was from his supervisor, Carl Hendricks, who had written, "See me when you get in a font size that suggested either urgency or passive aggression, and with Carl it was impossible to tell which. Jerry sighed, crumpled the email notification, and threw it at the general direction of his trash can. It missed. This was the most successful part of his morning so far. "Okay," he said to no one. Because he lived alone and the cat he'd briefly owned had run away 6 months ago, the cat had left a note, which Jerry still had pinned to his fridge. "The vibes in here are off. I'm going to live with a witch. Don't look for me. Okay, Tuesday. We've done this before. We can do it again." He had the day off. This was unusual. Carl had accidentally scheduled 2 people for the same shift and rather than admit the mistake, had told Jerry to take a personal day, in the same tone of voice one might use to recommend a vacation to someone with a terminal diagnosis. Jerry had taken the personal day. He had plans. The plans involved assembling a bookshelf. The bookshelf was an IKEA Bjorkvik, a model whose name sounded like a minor Norse deity and whose assembly instructions looked like a cryptic puzzle left behind by a civilization that had achieved enlightenment and then immediately forgotten how to write it down. Jerry had bought it secondhand from a woman on Craigslist who had described it as gently used and who had neglected to mention that gently used meant disassembled by someone who had a stroke halfway through and gave up. The box smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and regret. He hauled it out of the corner of his living room, where it had been leaning against the wall for 3 weeks like an accusation. The box was surprisingly heavy. Jerry was not surprisingly strong. He was a man whose physical existence could best be described as technically upright. His biceps had the approximate density of overcooked pasta. He dragged the box into the center of the room, opened it, and stared at the contents. There were boards. There were dowels. There were screws in quantities that did not seem to correspond to any known system of mathematics. There was an Allen key sealed in a plastic bag that looked like it contained a valuable artifact. And there was the instruction booklet, a folded piece of paper that unfolded into a map of a dimension where logic did not apply. Jerry took a deep breath. He was good at this. He was good at following instructions. He was the kind of person who read the terms and conditions of software updates. He was the kind of person who kept his receipts filed alphabetically by store name. He was, in short, exactly the kind of person the universe was about to punish for its own amusement. He unfolded the instruction booklet and spread it across his coffee table. The first step appeared to be attach side panel A to bottom panel B using screw C. There was a diagram of a stick figure doing this with a smile on its face. The stick figure had never met a real piece of IKEA furniture. The stick figure lived in a world of lies. "Okay," Jerry said again. "Side panel A, bottom panel B, screw C. I can do this." He reached into the box to retrieve side panel A and felt something that was definitely not wood. It was warm. It was smooth. It was pulsing with a faint rhythm like a heartbeat, which was deeply concerning because cardboard boxes should not have heartbeats. Jerry pulled his hand back like he'd been burned. He looked at his fingers. They were unremarkable. They had not been transformed into anything eldritch, which was a good sign. He looked back at the box. Something was glowing inside it. A soft, amber light, like a nightlight designed by someone who had never seen light before and was working from a verbal description. Jerry considered his options. Option 1. Close the box, throw it out the window, and never speak of this again. Option 2. Investigate further, because it was his day off and the burrito had been mediocre and frankly, he wanted something interesting to happen. He chose option 2. This was, statistically speaking, the worst decision he would make all week, but the week was young. He reached into the box again. His fingers brushed against the warm, pulsing object. It was about the size of a baseball, smooth as polished stone, and humming at a frequency that made his teeth itch. He closed his hand around it and lifted it out. It was a sphere, amber, translucent, with something moving inside it like smoke or liquid light. It was beautiful in the way that things that should not exist are beautiful. It was also, Jerry noticed with mounting dread, warm, which meant it was probably alive or radioactive or both. "What?" he said, "the hell?" The sphere pulsed once, brighter. The light intensified. Jerry heard a sound like 1,000 keyboards being struck simultaneously, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that vibrated in his feelings and his childhood memories and the deep, ancestral part of his brain that still remembered what it was like to be a fish. Then the sphere spoke. Or rather, the sphere projected a voice directly into Jerry's consciousness, a voice that was ancient and vast, and sounded like a customer service representative who had been on hold for approximately 40,000 years. System Initialization Protocol engaged scanning approved host specimen, please stand by. Jerry did not stand by. Jerry stood very still because his legs had stopped responding to commands from his brain, which had itself frozen in a state of profound confusion. The light from the sphere expanded, filling the room. The walls of his apartment began to shimmer, their familiar beige texture rippling like the surface of a pond. The ceiling flickered. The floor groaned. Somewhere in the distance, Jerry heard Mr. Petrocelli yell something in Italian, which was not unusual except that the yell seemed to come from approximately 300 feet below him, and Jerry lived on the 7th floor. Host scan complete analyzing. Gerald Fitch strength. 3 agility. For constitution, 5 charisma, 6 intelligence, 91 wisdom, 44 luck. Vibes, dubious. "Hey," Jerry said, finding his voice. "I object to that last one. My vibes are perfectly fine." The sphere pulsed again. The voice continued, flat and mechanical and somehow also tired, like an automated phone system that had been running so long it had developed a personality, and the personality was depression. Host does not meet minimum thresholds for standard deployment strength, below average agility, below average constitution, below average charisma, below average intelligence, exceptional wisdom, concerning luck, undetermined vibes, confirmed dubious recalculating, error, no suitable hosts available within range deployment protocol override engaged class assignment initiated assigned class, dungeon seed. Jerry blinked. Dungeon seed? What does that mean? What are you? What's happening to my apartment? The sphere did not answer. It was too busy rewriting reality. The light swelled to an unbearable intensity. Jerry threw his arms up to shield his eyes. The floor beneath him lurched. The walls of his apartment stretched and twisted, the beige paint running like watercolors in a hurricane. The ceiling vanished, replaced by a vault of darkness studded with lights that were not stars, that pulsed and breathed and watched. The Bjorkvik bookshelf, the one he had bought secondhand, the one he had been about to assemble, began to glow. The wood twisted, reformed, grew. It sprouted branches and roots and something that looked suspiciously like teeth. The instruction booklet lifted off the coffee table, folded itself into origami, and flew into the darkness like a confused bat. Jerry screamed. It was a good scream. It was a scream with passion and commitment and a solid understanding of the situation. He screamed for a long time. When he stopped screaming, the light had faded and his apartment was gone. He stood in a chamber. It was roughly the size of his living room, but the resemblance ended there. The walls were rough-hewn stone, lit by torches that burned with green flame. The floor was dirt. The ceiling was low enough that he could touch it if he jumped, which he would not, because it looked like it was made of bones. There was a door where his bathroom used to be, a heavy wooden door banded with iron. There was a chest in the corner of the room, made of dark wood and reinforced with steel. There was, inexplicably, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, which was either a safety code violation or the most responsible thing in the entire chamber, depending on how you looked at it. And there was a message, floating in the air in front of him, written in letters of golden light that hovered about eye level, was a system notification. It was, Jerry noticed with a mixture of horror and professional appreciation, very well formatted. System notification, Planetary Integration Event Class, Dungeon Seed Host, Gerald Fitch Location, Petrocelli Arms, Unit 7 Alpha Tier, Level 1 Dungeon Status, Active. Congratulations, Gerald Fitch. You have been selected as a Dungeon Seed, the foundational class for a living dungeon ecosystem. Your territory has been established. Your denizens are spawning. Your dungeon will grow. Please report to your dungeon core within the next 24 hours to complete the onboarding process. Failure to comply will result in automatic assignment of Dungeon Lord duties. The system thanks you for your patience during the 40,000-year dormancy period. We apologize for any inconvenience caused by the delayed deployment. Note: this is an automated message. Please do not reply to this message. Any attempt to reply will be ignored. The system is not responsible for emotional distress, existential crises, or lost property. Jerry read the message 3 times. He read it a 4th time because his brain needed time to catch up with the situation. Then he did what any reasonable person would do when confronted with the collapse of objective reality and the reassignment of their existence into a dungeon-based ecosystem. He sat down on the dirt floor, put his head in his hands, and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has run out of emotional responses and is now working through the menu in alphabetical order. It was the laugh of a man whose Tuesday had gone from assemble a bookshelf to become a dungeon in the span of approximately 90 seconds. Okay, he said when the laughter subsided. Okay, let's think about this. He stood up. He brushed the dirt off his jeans. He looked at the iron-banded door, the chest in the corner, the fire extinguisher, the green flame torches. He looked at the notification, still hovering in the air, still golden, still very well formatted. First, he said, addressing the room at large, I need to find out what a dungeon core is. Second, I need to figure out what happened to my neighbors. Third, I need to know if I can still order pizza delivery to this address. The room did not answer, but the notification flickered and a new line appeared at the bottom. Additional note: pizza delivery is not recommended. Delivery persons have been known to trigger aggressive denizen spawning protocols. The system is not responsible for the loss of life, limb, or pepperoni toppings resulting from unauthorized food delivery attempts. Jerry stared at the message. He stared at it for a long time. The system, he said slowly, has addressed pizza delivery before it has addressed anything else. This is my life now. He walked toward the iron-banded door. The green torches flickered as he passed, and he could have sworn the shadows moved in ways that shadows should not move. He put his hand on the door, felt the cold iron, the rough wood. Okay, Jerry, he whispered to himself. You are a dungeon seed. You do not know what that means. You are going to find out. And somewhere in this nightmare, there are instructions, and you are going to read them, and you are going to figure this out, because you are a help desk technician, and you have dealt with worse systems than this. He pushed the door open. Behind him, unnoticed, the Bjorkvik bookshelf, or what had become of it, stirred in the darkness of the chamber. The instruction booklet, having completed its origami transformation, settled into a crevice in the bone ceiling and unfolded itself. The directions inside were now written in a language that had not been spoken since before the first fish crawled onto land. The Allen key was missing. It would always be missing. It was already a legend, and it had been a legend long before Jerry Fitch had ever bought a second-hand bookshelf on Craigslist for $40 and a vague sense of ambition. Jerry stepped through the door. The dungeon welcomed him with the sound of something growling in the distance, the smell of damp earth and ozone, and the quiet, persistent hum of a system that was already beginning to realize it had made a terrible mistake. The Tuesday afternoon apocalypse had begun. Chapter 2: Welcome to your new reality and its terms of service. The corridor beyond the iron-banded door was long, dark, and smelled like a basement that had given up on itself. Jerry walked for approximately 40 seconds before he encountered his first dungeon denizen, which turned out to be a squirrel. The squirrel was sitting in the middle of the corridor, twitching. It looked confused. It looked like it had been going about its squirrel business, burying nuts, evading predators, contemplating the eternal mysteries of the acorn, when reality had shifted beneath it, and now it was standing in a dungeon corridor wondering where all the trees had gone. Jerry could relate. "Hey," Jerry said. The squirrel made a noise. It was not a threatening noise. It was the noise a squirrel makes when it wants to file a complaint. "I know," Jerry said. "Me too." The squirrel ran away. Jerry watched it go, envying its ability to just leave. He continued walking. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. This one had a ceiling that was actually a ceiling, which was nice. It also had a desk. The desk was wooden, old, and covered in a layer of dust that suggested it had been there for approximately 40,000 years, which it probably had. On top of the desk sat a sphere. Not the sphere from the box. This one was smaller, about the size of a grapefruit, and it was pulsing with a soft blue light. Jerry approached it cautiously. "Hello." The sphere pulsed brighter. A notification appeared in the air above it. "Dungeon Core. Uninitialized, please place your hand on the core to complete onboarding warning. Do not remove the core from its pedestal. Previous dungeon seeds who did so experienced immediate and catastrophic disintegration. The system is not responsible for dungeon seeds who do not read warnings." Jerry read the warning carefully. He appreciated a system that used the word catastrophic correctly. He placed his hand on the sphere. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Information flooded into his brain, not as words, but as pure data, a fire hose of knowledge about dungeon mechanics, mana flows, spawning protocols, territory expansion, and something called denizen morale that the system apparently tracked with the same seriousness as everything else. His eyes rolled back. His knees buckled. He held on to the sphere because letting go would have meant falling on his face, and he was committed to this course of action now. When it was over, he staggered backward, gasping. The sphere glowed contentedly. Onboarding complete. Dungeon Core initialized class. Dungeon Seed current tier. Level 1 mana pool. 50/50ths denizen capacity. 5 out of 10 territory. Petrocelli arms. Floors 1 to 3. Unstable. Dungeon Lord. Gerald Fitch. Provisional. Notice, some features are locked. Upgrade your Dungeon Core to unlock additional capabilities. The system recommends focusing on basic infrastructure before attempting advanced dungeon management. Provisional? Jerry said. What does that mean? The system answered with another notification. Provisional status. Your Dungeon Lord status is conditional upon successful completion of the trial period, 30 days. During this period, you must defeat at least 5 adventurer incursions, maintain positive denizen morale, current, neutral, expand your territory by at least 1 floor, read and acknowledge the system terms and conditions. Failure to meet any of these requirements will result in automatic declassification and reassignment of your dungeon seed status to a more qualified candidate. The system thanks you for your understanding. Read and acknowledge the system terms and conditions, Jerry repeated. You have a terms and conditions document? Like a software license agreement. The notification shimmered. Then it expanded, unfolding like a scroll made of light, revealing a document so long that it stretched from the floor to the ceiling and then continued through the floor into some kind of extra-dimensional pocket designed specifically to hold an unreasonable amount of fine print. System Terms and Conditions version 47.2.1, last updated. Cycle 84329, PRE Dormancy, Preamble. Greetings, Dungeon Seed. By accepting the responsibilities of Dungeon Lord, you agree to the following terms and conditions. Please read carefully. These terms govern your use of the system, your dungeon, your denizens, and your continued existence as a sapient entity. Please do not skip this document. Many Dungeon Seeds have done so, and many Dungeon Seeds have subsequently experienced negative outcomes, including but not limited to spontaneous mana combustion, soul reclamation proceedings, and being eaten by their own dungeons. We're serious. Read it. Jerry's eyebrows rose. He had been reading terms and conditions documents, really reading them, not just clicking "I agree" like a digital lemming, since he was old enough to use the internet. He was the kind of person who had actually read the iTunes terms and conditions, all 17,000 words of it, and had found it surprisingly interesting. He knew that most people signed away their firstborn children and a non-exclusive license to their DNA on a daily basis without blinking. He was not most people. "Okay," he said, settling onto the dirt floor of the dungeon chamber, crossing his legs, and squinting up at the constantly scrolling document. "Let's see what we've got." He read for 3 hours. He learned that the system was constructed by a civilization called the Architects, who had existed approximately 40,000 years ago and had since either transcended physical existence or died out, depending on which section you believed. The system was designed to facilitate planetary integration, essentially converting a world's native population into a game-like framework for purposes that the terms described as ecosystem optimization, and which Jerry suspected meant amusement. He learned that Dungeon Seeds were created when the system needed a central node for dungeon expansion, and that the process was not normally intended for native sapients. Dungeon Seeds were supposed to be planted, not people. The fact that Jerry was a person, a conscious, sentient, terrified person, was apparently a bug in the deployment protocol, and the system had addressed this bug by adding a footnote that said, "We're working on it." He learned that there were loopholes, dozens of them, hundreds of them. The terms and conditions were written by bureaucrats from a civilization of bureaucrats, and bureaucratic documents are by their nature full of gaps, contradictions, and clauses that can be exploited by anyone patient enough to find them. The Architects had apparently assumed that no Dungeon Seed would ever read the terms. They had been wrong. They had been catastrophically wrong, and they were 40,000 years too dead to do anything about it. Jerry found the first loophole on page 47. Section 12, subsection C. Dungeon Seeds are required to engage in aggressive territorial expansion as determined by the system's assessment of optimal growth parameters. The loophole was in the definition of aggressive. The Architects had defined it in Section 1, Glossary of Terms. Aggressive, characterized by or tending toward unprovoked offensives, invasions, or hostile actions. But Section 8, subsection A of the same glossary defined unprovoked as occurring without prior justification as determined by the Dungeon Seed's internal assessment of threat levels. Which meant that if Jerry could justify that he was not being aggressive, that he was acting defensively or peacefully, or simply too lazy to bother, then he was not bound by the expansion requirement. He couldn't believe it. He read it again. It was still there. He started making notes. By the time he finished reading, for hours had passed, the green torches had burned down to embers, and Jerry had identified 17 exploitable loopholes, 12 contradictory clauses, and one section that appeared to grant Dungeon Seeds the right to form labor unions. He had also memorized Section 47, which detailed the procedures for formally disputing system actions, and which the Architects had buried so deep in the document that they had apparently assumed no one would ever find it. He stood up, stretched his back, it cracked in 3 places, and looked at the dungeon core with something approaching confidence. "All right," he said. "I have read your terms and conditions. I have understood them. I have found 17 ways around them. And I have a question." The core pulsed. The system seemed almost reluctant to respond. "Query acknowledged. Please state your question." "I have a dungeon. My apartment building is now a dungeon. My neighbors are in this building. What happened to them?" The system paused. Jerry could feel it thinking, processing his question through the same ancient bureaucratic logic that had governed it for 40 millennia. Finally, a notification appeared. Analysis. Petrocelli Arms residents have been integrated into the dungeon ecosystem as part of the standard deployment protocol. Each resident has been assigned a dungeon role based on their suitability and proximity to the dungeon core. The system apologizes for any inconvenience. "Inconvenience," Jerry said flatly. "You turn my neighbors into dungeon monsters, and you call it an inconvenience. Show me their statuses." The system complied, reluctantly. A list appeared. Petrocelli Arms, Resident Roster Unit 7 Alpha, Gerald Fitch, Dungeon Seed, Provisional, Unit 7 Beta, Linda Hargrove, Assigned Role, Mimic Trainer. Apparently, she has always been good with animals. She is confused but adapting. Unit 6 Alpha, Marcus Chun, Assigned Role, Trap Maintenance. He is a mechanical engineer. This is actually a good fit. Unit 6 Beta, Mrs. Patterson, Assigned Role, Hag. She was already a hag. The system just made it official. Unit 5 Alpha, The Broccoli Smell, Assigned Role, Environmental Hazard. This was already happening. The system is not responsible. Unit 5 Beta, Kevin, Assigned Role, Floor Decoration. Kevin is standing very still in the corridor on floor 3. He has accepted his fate. Unit 4 Alpha, Sergei Volkov, Assigned Role, Trapdoor Guardian. He is thrilled. He has been waiting for this his entire life. Unit 4 Beta, Empty, Assigned Role, None. The previous tenant disappeared 3 months ago. Nobody noticed. The system has filed a report. And so on, for all 24 units. And at the very bottom. Ground Floor / Management, Vito Petrocelli, Assigned Role, Dungeon Boss, Floor 1 Boss Encounter, Status, Furious. Has left 17 increasingly angry voicemails on the system's customer service line. The system does not have a customer service line. He has not stopped calling. Jerry stared at the notification. He stared at it for a long time. Then he laughed, because laughing was cheaper than crying, and he had already used up his crying budget for the month. "Okay," he said. "Mr. Petrocelli is the dungeon boss. Linda is a mimic trainer. Kevin is a floor decoration. This is fine. This is all fine." He looked around the chamber. The dungeon core pulsed. The torches flickered. Somewhere in the distance, he heard what sounded like someone, possibly Sergei Volkov, shouting in Russian with the enthusiastic joy of a man who had just discovered his life's true calling. Jerry Fitch, help desk technician, dungeon lord, and the only person in the multiverse who had actually read the system's terms and conditions, took a deep breath. "All right, system," he said. "Show me what I can build. I've got a feeling I'm going to need it." The system responded with a list of available upgrades, structures, and amenities. It was a long list. Jerry started reading. Somewhere on floor 1, in what used to be the lobby of the Petrocelli Arms, Mr. Petrocelli was standing in the middle of his new boss arena, a large chamber with a throne made of discarded rent notices, and screaming at a system notification that was trying to explain his new responsibilities. "I did not sign up for this," Mr. Petrocelli bellowed, shaking his fist at the floating text. "I am a landlord. I collect rent. I threaten to evict people. I do not guard treasure." The notification flickered, as if the system was trying to find the right words to express its complete lack of concern. Noted. Please report to your boss arena for duty. Shift starts in 15 minutes. Please wear appropriate boss attire. "I am wearing appropriate attire," Mr. Petrocelli shouted, gesturing at his sweatpants and stained undershirt. "This is appropriate attire for being very angry." The notification flickered again. Acknowledged. Your anger is noted and has been added to your boss statistics. +5 to intimidation. Please report to your boss arena. Mr. Petroselli looked around his boss arena. It was, objectively, a nice boss arena. The walls were stone, the floor was flagstone, the ceiling was high and dramatic. There was a treasure chest in the corner. There was a braziers with green fire. There was a lever that probably did something ominous. He looked at the throne made of rent notices. He sat down in it, grudgingly. It was comfortable. This made him angrier. I am going to kill whoever did this, he announced to the empty room. I am going to find them. I am going to evict them from existence. And then I am going to charge them a late fee. In his dungeon core chamber, 3 floors above, Jerry sneezed. He had the strangest feeling that somewhere, someone was very angry at him. He had the same feeling every time Carl sent an email in a large font size. He ignored it and kept reading. The system's terms and conditions, he had discovered, contained an entire subsection about dispute resolution that allowed dungeon seeds to challenge system decisions through a formal arbitration process. The arbitration process was administered by a committee of system subroutines that had been dormant for 40,000 years and would take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to process a claim. Jerry had already filed 3 claims. He had filed a claim about being classified as a dungeon seed when he had not applied for the position. He had filed a claim about his neighbors being involuntarily reclassified as dungeon denizens. And he had filed a claim about the broccoli smell being classified as an environmental hazard, which, while accurate, he felt should have been disclosed before the integration event. He had also, on page 342 of the terms, discovered a clause that granted dungeon seeds the right to peaceful assembly. He had immediately forwarded it to the squirrel, which he had designated as the dungeon's first official denizen representative. The squirrel had not responded, but Jerry was optimistic. He was, against all odds and the expressed will of the universe, starting to enjoy himself. All right, he said, cracking his knuckles. Let me see what you've got for floor plans. The system showed him floor plans, and for the first time since the sphere had erupted from his second-hand bookshelf, Jerry felt something that was not terror or confusion. He felt interested. It was going to be a long 30-day trial period. Chapter 3: The First Adventurer, a Systemic Failure. Jerry was in the middle of a very important project when the first adventurer arrived. He was building a welcome desk. It was not a glamorous project. It was not a project that would strike fear into the hearts of heroes or inspire ballads about the terrible dungeon lord of the Petroselli Arms. It was a folding table that he had found in the janitor's closet on floor 2, which he had dragged to the entrance chamber and set up next to the dungeon core. He had draped a bedsheet over it. He had put a sign on it that read, in careful block letters, "Welcome to the Petroselli dungeon. Please sign and waiver required. No fireballs in the lobby." He was very proud of the sign. He was less proud of the waiver, which he had written by hand on notebook paper and which he was fairly sure was not legally binding in any jurisdiction, dungeon or otherwise. But it asked important questions. Do you have any pre-existing conditions, curses, hexes, existential dread? And do you understand that entering this dungeon may result in a death, B. debt, C. a moderate to severe identity crisis, D. all of the above? And please initial here to acknowledge that the dungeon lord is not responsible for lost limbs, lost souls, or lost car keys. He had just finished taping the waiver to the table when the system pinged. Alert! Adventurer detected. Incoming hostile. Classification: Level 3 fighter. Estimated arrival: 90 seconds. Recommendation: deploy defenses. Release denizens. Prepare for combat. Jerry froze. Combat? I don't do combat. I do help desk. The closest I've come to combat was that time I argued with Carl about the break room coffee. The system did not care. The system pinged again. Adventurer inbound. Current defenses: none. Current denizens: 1 confused squirrel. Status: has left the building. Recommendation: panic. I'm not going to panic, Jerry said, though his voice cracked on the word panic. Panic is not a strategy. Panic is what you do when you haven't read the terms and conditions. I have read the terms and conditions. I know what I'm doing. He did not know what he was doing. He had approximately 60 seconds to figure it out. The entrance to the dungeon, which had once been the front door of the Petrocelli Arms, and which now looked like a cave mouth adorned with wrought iron, and the building's original, no soliciting sign, creaked open. Light spilled in from outside, which was still Tuesday, which was somehow still happening. A figure stepped through the entrance. He was tall. He was broad. He was wearing plate armor that gleamed with the kind of polish that suggested he had never actually been in a fight. He carried a sword that was bigger than Jerry's entire torso. He had a mustache. It was an impressive mustache. Jerry felt inadequate just looking at it. The adventurer, level 3 fighter, according to the system's overlay, looked around the entrance chamber. He saw the stone walls. He saw the green torches. He saw the dungeon core pulsing in the center of the room. He saw Jerry, standing behind a folding table with a bedsheet draped over it and a handwritten sign taped to the front. He stared. Jerry stared back. The adventurer's name, according to the information that the system helpfully displayed in Jerry's peripheral vision, was Sir Reginald Thornawood III. He was 23 years old. He had an intelligence score of 9. He had a charisma score of 14, which explained the mustache. His primary motivation for dungeon delving was prove to my father that I am not a disappointment. Jerry felt a sudden, unexpected surge of sympathy. He knew what it was like to have a father who thought you were a disappointment. His own father had once described his IT help desk job as, well, someone has to do it, I suppose, in the same tone of voice one might use to describe a particularly stubborn stain. Greetings, Dungeon Lord, Sir Reginald announced, his voice echoing impressively off the stone walls. I am Sir Reginald Thornawood III, Knight of the Crimson Valley, bearer of the Sacred Oath, and— Hi, Jerry said. Welcome to the dungeon. Please sign in. He gestured at the waiver on the table. Sir Reginald stopped mid-declaration. He looked at the waiver. He looked at Jerry. He looked at the waiver again. Sign in. Yes. Standard procedure. Name, class, level, emergency contact. Waiver on the second page. Please read it carefully before signing. I need you to initial next to the part about fireballs. Sir Reginald's sword hand twitched. I came here to fight monsters and claim treasure. There are no monsters yet. I'm still setting up. The goblins aren't scheduled to spawn until tomorrow. And the treasure is— Jerry glanced at the chest in the corner, which he had filled with random items from his apartment, including a half-eaten bag of pretzels and an old issue of National Geographic. Pending. I don't understand. The Adventurers Guild said this was an active dungeon. They said there was a dungeon lord inside who needed to be put down. Put down, Jerry said, offended. I'm not a rabid dog. I'm a help desk technician. I have a 401k. Well, I had a 401k. I don't know if it survived the planetary integration event. I should probably check on that. Sir Reginald looked around the room again. His gaze landed on the dungeon core, which pulsed gently. He looked at the sign. He looked at the waiver. He looked at Jerry's face, which was trying very hard to project calm competence and was succeeding only at projecting mild panic. This isn't a dungeon, Sir Reginald said slowly. This is an apartment building. It used to be. It's a dungeon now. Technically, according to the system. I'm still figuring it out. You're still figuring it out? Yes. I've only been a dungeon lord for— Jerry checked his mental clock. About 6 hours. I haven't even had lunch. Well, I had a burrito, but it was microwaved and it was terrible and I don't think it counts. Sir Reginald was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised both of them. He sheathed his sword. You know what, he said. I need to sit down. Jerry gestured at the floor. It's not comfortable, but it's available. Sir Reginald sat. His armor clanked as he settled onto the stone floor. He looked up at Jerry, and his expression shifted from confusion to something like exhaustion. My father sent me here, he said. He said if I couldn't clear a level 1 dungeon, I wasn't worthy of the family name. He said I needed to prove myself. He said he stopped. His voice cracked. He said I was a disappointment. Jerry sat down across from him. Yeah, my dad says that too. Not about dungeons, about my job. He wanted me to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or literally anything with a title. I fix printers for a living. A noble profession, Sir Reginald said, without irony. It's not, but it pays the rent. Well, it used to. I don't know if I still have to pay rent now that Mr. Petrocelli is a dungeon boss. I should probably ask him. Sir Reginald looked at Jerry. Jerry looked at Sir Reginald. The green torches flickered. The dungeon core pulsed. Somewhere in the distance, the squirrel, who had not, in fact, left the building, but had instead taken up residence in the ceiling vents, chittered in what might have been agreement. I have a protein bar, Jerry offered. It's not much, but it's something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly crushed protein bar. He held it out to Sir Reginald. The knight stared at it like it was a legendary artifact. You're giving me food? You came all this way. You didn't have lunch. I know how that feels. Sir Reginald took the protein bar. He unwrapped it. He took a bite. His expression shifted from exhaustion to something like wonder. This is actually not terrible. It's peanut butter chocolate chip. The best flavor. I keep a stash in my desk at work. They sat in silence for a moment, eating protein bar and contemplating the absurdity of their situation. I should still probably try to kill you, Sir Reginald said, without conviction. I'd prefer if you didn't. I have a lot of paperwork to do. The system says I need to expand my territory by at least 1 floor in 30 days, and I haven't even figured out where to put the stairs. You could use the elevator. The building has an elevator. It's a dungeon now. I don't think dungeons have elevators. They have spiral staircases and hidden passages, and, Jerry paused. Actually, wait. That's a good point. Why can't dungeons have elevators? It would be more accessible. The system might not allow it. The system has a lot of rules, but it also has loopholes. I found 17 of them this morning. I bet I can find an elevator loophole. Sir Reginald finished the protein bar. He crumpled the wrapper and put it in his pocket, a surprisingly considerate gesture for someone who had entered the dungeon intending to commit murder. He stood up, his armor clanking. I should go, he said. I need to report back to the guild. They'll want to know about this dungeon. What will you tell them? Sir Reginald thought about it. I'll tell them the dungeon lord is unexpected, and that the dungeon requires further assessment, and that I didn't defeat it because, he paused, searching for the right words, because the tactical situation was unclear. So you're not going to tell them I gave you a protein bar and we had a nice chat about our dads? No, that would be embarrassing for both of us. Fair enough. Sir Reginald walked toward the entrance. He stopped at the threshold and turned back. Dungeon Lord, one piece of advice. Sure. The Adventurers Guild will send more people. They won't all be as reasonable as me. You should probably get those goblins spawned sooner rather than later. Noted. Also, Sir Reginald hesitated. You might want to read the guild's standard dungeon response protocols. They're in the system database. They have loopholes too. Jerry smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had managed all day. Thanks. I will. Sir Reginald nodded once, sharply, and stepped through the entrance. The cave mouth shimmered, and he was gone. Jerry stood alone in his dungeon. The dungeon core pulsed. The torches flickered. He looked at his welcome desk, his waiver, his sign. System, he said. Did that just count as defeating an adventurer incursion? The system paused. Then a notification appeared. Incident log. Adventurer incursion number 1 status. Resolved. Nonviolent outcome assessment. Adventurer departed without engaging in hostile action. Conclusion. Technically, yes. This is unprecedented. Reward. Plus 50 experience points. Bonus. Plus 10 denizen morale, because the system found this funny. Jerry grinned. Huh. Technically, yes. I'll take it. The system offered one more notification. Level up. Dungeon Lord. Gerald Fitch new level. 2 status. Provisional. Active. Bonus stat points. 5 new title unlocked. The Negotiator. Grants plus 10% to all diplomacy-based interactions. The system is deeply uncomfortable with this title. 5 stat points to assign, Jerry said, rubbing his hands together. Let me think about this. He looked at his base stats: Strength 3, Agility 4, Constitution 5, Charisma 6, Intelligence 91, Wisdom 44. The numbers were a testament to a life spent behind a desk, solving problems with his brain instead of his body. He put all 5 points into intelligence. The system flickered. Stat update. Intelligence 91-96 notes. Your intelligence has exceeded the 95th percentile for dungeon seeds. This is unusual. Most dungeon seeds allocate points to combat statistics. The system recommends reconsidering this allocation. The system has learned that you will not reconsider. The system is resigned to this. You know me so well, Jerry said. He looked at the dungeon core, which pulsed in what he could have sworn was amusement. A new interface element appeared, a skill tree specifically for dungeon lords. It was extensive. It was detailed. It was full of options that Jerry had never considered. Dark Lord's Domain, Flesh Crafting, Soul Absorption, the Devouring Dark. He scrolled past all of them. He kept scrolling. At the very bottom, in a section labeled Alternative Paths, Not Recommended, he found something interesting. Administrative efficiency, he read, allows the dungeon lord to process dungeon paperwork at twice the speed. Unlocks the ability to delegate system notifications to denizens. He selected it. The system pinged. Skill unlocked. Administrative efficiency, rank 1. Notes. This skill has never been selected by any dungeon seed in the history of the system. The architects did not anticipate that anyone would choose paperwork optimization over soul-devouring powers. The system is baffled. Baffled is good, Jerry said. Baffled means I'm doing something right. He looked around his dungeon, his strange, wonderful, deeply confused dungeon, and felt something he had not expected to feel. He felt ready. All right, let's get those goblins spawned, and then let's find that elevator loophole. We've got a dungeon to run. Chapter 4: Goblins, Unions, and the IKEA Labyrinth. The goblins spawned on Wednesday morning, approximately 17 hours after Jerry became a dungeon lord. They appeared in the basement of the Petrocelli Arms, which the system had automatically designated as Floor 2, and which Jerry had not yet had time to furnish with anything except a single folding chair and a growing sense of dread. There were 12 of them. They were short, green, pointy-eared, and armed with an assortment of weapons that looked like they had been salvaged from a medieval junkyard. They were also, Jerry noted with some surprise, extremely disorganized. 2 of them were arguing about whose turn it was to carry the torch. A third was trying to eat a rock. A fourth had gotten his spear stuck in a ceiling beam and was hanging from it, kicking his legs and making distressed noises. Jerry watched them through a system interface that had helpfully labeled each one with a name, a level, and a status indicator. Their levels ranged from 1 to 3. Their morale was listed as confused. Their collective intelligence was approximately equal to a slightly below-average goldfish. He should have been afraid. They were monsters. They were his monsters. They existed to kill adventurers, and by extension, to serve him as the dungeon lord. But standing at the top of the basement stairs, watching a goblin named Grubnak try to explain to a goblin named Glibble that you could not, in fact, trade rocks for gold at the dungeon shop, because there was no dungeon shop, Jerry felt something that was not fear. It was sympathy. All right, he said, descending the stairs. Everyone stop what you're doing. We need to have a meeting. The goblins stopped. They turned to look at him. Several of them drew weapons. One of them, Grubnak, the one who had been explaining basic economics to Glibble, stepped forward, brandishing a rusty short sword. Who are you? Grubnak demanded. His voice was gravelly and surprisingly authoritative for someone who was 3 feet tall and wearing a helmet made of an old soup pot. I'm the Dungeon Lord. I run this place, and you're my goblins, which means we need to establish some ground rules. Grubnak squinted at him. Ground rules? Yes. Rule 1, no stabbing the Dungeon Lord. That's me. Rule 2, no stabbing each other unless it's during designated combat hours. Rule 3, we need to talk about working conditions. The goblins exchanged glances. The one hanging from the ceiling beam finally fell, landing with a thud that knocked the wind out of him. He lay there for a moment, then got up, dusted himself off, and rejoined the group like nothing had happened. Working conditions? Grubnak said slowly. Yes, you're dungeon denizens. You're supposed to guard this place, fight adventurers, and die dramatically. But I've read the system terms and conditions, and Section 47, subsection B clearly states that denizens have the right to collectively bargain for improved working conditions. Grubnak's eyes widened. He had no idea what collectively bargain meant, but it sounded important. Go on. You're going to get hurt. You might die. That's the nature of being a dungeon goblin. But you don't have to do it for free. I'm proposing a compensation package. Fair hours. A share of the loot. And, Jerry paused for effect. Dental. The word dental rippled through the goblin ranks like a shockwave. Goblins began whispering to each other. Glibble dropped his rock. The one who had been hanging from the ceiling started crying, although it was unclear whether these were tears of joy or just a delayed reaction to his fall. Dental, Grubnak repeated. What's dental? It's, you know what, I'll explain later. The point is, I want to treat you fairly. In exchange, you protect the dungeon. You fight adventurers when they come. And you don't eat my cheese crackers. Which cheese crackers? A goblin in the back asked. The ones in the dungeon core chamber. They're mine. I have a limited supply, and I'm not sharing. The goblins held a whispered conference. It lasted approximately 30 seconds, which was an eternity by goblin standards. Then Grubnak turned back to Jerry. We have counteroffer, he said. You have a counteroffer? Yes. We want fair hours, share of loot, and dental. Also we want your cheese crackers. No. Half your cheese crackers. No. 1 cheese cracker. Per week. Per goblin. Jerry considered it. 1 cheese cracker per goblin per week. But only if you complete your assigned duties. And you have to attend safety training. What's safety training? It's where I teach you not to stab yourselves in the foot with your own weapons. Another whispered conference. This one lasted 15 seconds. Deal, Grubnak said. They shook hands. It was, Jerry reflected, probably the first labor negotiation in dungeon history that had concluded without anyone dying. He made a mental note to document it for the system archives, which he had discovered had a surprisingly detailed section on historical dungeon labor relations that was mostly empty. The maze was Jerry's idea. After establishing the Goblin Union, and after spending an hour writing up a formal contract on notebook paper, which Grubnak had signed with an X that he had drawn with great concentration, Jerry turned his attention to the dungeon's defenses. The system had provided him with a list of available structures, standard walls, spike pits, arrow slits, trapdoors, and something called the Lament configuration, which Jerry immediately decided was not worth investigating. But none of those felt right. The goblins were small, nimble, and, now that they had a union contract, motivated. What they needed was not a kill box. What they needed was an environment where they could use their size and numbers to maximum advantage. What they needed, Jerry realized, was an IKEA showroom. IKEA, Grubnak said flatly. What's IKEA? It's a furniture store. They sell flat-pack furniture. The instructions are terrible. Nobody ever assembles them correctly. And by the time you've finished building a bookshelf, you've lost all will to live. And this helps us fight adventurers how? Adventurers are big. They're strong. They're used to fighting in open spaces where they can swing their swords and cast their spells. But a maze of half-assembled furniture? Narrow corridors, sharp corners, unexpected dead ends? That's not a battlefield. That's a nightmare. Grubnak considered this. So we build a nightmare. Exactly. Jerry had a problem, however. He had spent the last of his money on the Bjorkvik bookshelf that had started this whole mess, and the system's initial mana allocation for construction was limited. He couldn't just conjure furniture out of thin air. He had to work with what he had. What he had was 12 goblins, a basement full of abandoned storage items, and a dungeon core that could convert raw materials into dungeon structures if he fed it enough mana. He spent the rest of Wednesday scavenging the building. The Petrocelli Arms had accumulated decades of abandoned furniture in its basement storage units. Broken chairs, wobbly tables, a mattress that had seen things no mattress should see, and, most importantly, 3 unassembled IKEA bookshelves of various models, left behind by tenants who had given up halfway through assembly and moved out in shame. By Wednesday evening, the dungeon's floor 2 had been transformed. Where once there had been a simple basement corridor, there was now a labyrinth of furniture, bookshelves acting as walls, tables serving as ceilings in low-crawl sections, chairs arranged in confusing clusters that served no purpose except to disorient. The mattress had been propped up in a corner as a soft trap. Anyone who touched it would be so disgusted that they would lose a turn. The goblins took to their new environment with surprising enthusiasm. They knew every shortcut, every hiding spot, every loose board that could be used as an improvised weapon. Grubnak had appointed himself the maze's chief architect and had already designed 3 expansions using nothing but a stick and the dirt floor. "This is good," Grubnak said, standing at the entrance to the maze. "Adventurers will get lost. They will get tired. They will get angry. And we will be waiting. They'll also get stabbed," a goblin added helpfully. "Yes," Grubnak said. "That too." Jerry looked at his creation. It was not a traditional dungeon. It did not have grand halls or epic boss chambers or a single treasure chest that was not filled with old magazines and broken electronics. But it was his. It was functional. And it was, in its own absurd way, perfect. "All right," he said. "Now we wait for the next adventurer." He didn't have to wait long. The adventuring party arrived on Thursday morning. There were 4 of them: a human fighter named Borin Stonehand, a elven ranger named Saravan, a dwarven cleric named Helga Ironfoot, and a halfling rogue named Pip Quickfingers. They were level 4. They were experienced. They had matching cloaks embroidered with the crest of the Adventurers Guild, which meant they took themselves very seriously. Jerry watched them approach the dungeon entrance through the system's surveillance interface. They were discussing strategy. The guild report said this is a level 1 dungeon with a pacifist dungeon lord, Borin was saying. "Should be a quick run. In and out. Grab the loot. Come home for lunch." "I heard the first adventurer who went in came out with a protein bar," Pip said, sounding skeptical. "A protein bar? That's not loot. That's a snack." "It's something. Maybe the dungeon lord is trying to bribe us." "If he tries to bribe me with a protein bar, I'll take it and then stab him anyway." They laughed. Jerry watched them. He did not laugh. "System," he said. "Activate floor 2 defenses and tell the goblins to get into position." The system pinged acknowledgement. In the maze below, 12 goblins armed with rusty weapons and a newly signed union contract settled into their hiding spots. Grubnak stood at the center of the maze, holding a torch and a crudely drawn map. He was ready. The adventurers entered the dungeon. They made it through the entrance chamber without incident. They found Jerry's welcome desk. They saw the sign. They laughed again. "A welcome desk?" Borin said. "What kind of dungeon has a welcome desk?" "Sign says we need to sign in," Pip observed, reading the waiver, "and initial next to the fireball clause." "I'm not signing anything. I'm here to kill monsters and take their stuff." They bypassed the welcome desk. They ignored the waiver. They descended the stairs to floor 2. And then, because they had not read the terms and conditions, because they had not signed the waiver, and because they had laughed at the welcome desk, they entered the maze. The first hour was confusion. The maze was not designed to kill. It was designed to disorient. The adventurers took wrong turns. They hit dead ends that were actually walls made of bookshelves. They found a table with a note on it that said, "You are here," with an arrow pointing at a dot, but the map showed nothing else, and the note was just a cruel joke. The second hour was frustration. Boren tried to break through a wall by hitting it with his sword. The wall was made of reinforced IKEA particle board, which had the surprising property of being extremely resistant to bladed weapons. His sword got stuck. It took him 20 minutes to pull it out. During that time, a goblin stole his left boot. The third hour was despair. They had been in the maze for 3 hours. They had not found the exit. They had not found any treasure. They had not found any monsters, except for the goblins, who kept appearing out of nowhere, throwing rocks, and disappearing back into the furniture. It wasn't combat. It was harassment, and it was working. "We need to regroup," Helga said, leaning against a wall that was actually a wardrobe. "We're being picked apart." "Regroup where?" Saravan demanded. "Every corridor looks the same. I've seen that same bookshelf 6 times. I'm starting to recognize individual books." "This is insane," Boren said. "The guild said this was a level 1 dungeon. Level 1 dungeons don't have mazes. Level 1 dungeons have rats. And maybe a skeleton." "This isn't a normal dungeon," Pip said quietly. He was sitting on the floor, holding the stolen boot that the goblins had left as a calling card. "This dungeon lord is different. He made a welcome desk. He wrote a waiver. Pip paused. He unionized his goblins." "Unionized?" Boren stared at him. "Goblins don't unionize." "The notice pinned to the wall says they did. I read it while you were trying to get your sword unstuck. It's very detailed. They have dental." The party fell silent. 2 floors above, Jerry watched them through the system interface and smiled. "System," he said. "Open a direct line to the adventurers." Communication channel established. "Hello, adventurers," Jerry said, his voice echoing through the maze speakers that the system had provided. "This is Gerald Fitch, Dungeon Lord of the Petrocelli Dungeon. I'm going to make you an offer." The adventurers looked at each other. They looked at the ceiling. They looked at the stolen boot. "I'm listening," Boren said. "You've been in my maze for 3 hours. You haven't found the exit. You haven't found the treasure. You haven't even found my goblins, because they keep running away. You're tired. You're hungry. And one of you is missing a boot." "I'm aware." "Here's the deal. I will guide you to the exit. You leave my dungeon. You tell the guild that the Petrocelli dungeon is not worth raiding. And I give you this." A panel in the wall slid open. Inside was a basket. And inside the basket was, for protein bars, a map of the safe route out, and a coupon for 20% off at the nearest pizza place that Jerry had found in his junk drawer. "You're bribing us," Boren said. "I'm compensating you for your time. There's a difference. We could just find our own way out. Based on your current trajectory, you'll find the exit in approximately 4 hours, assuming you don't hit any of the dead ends I've added since you entered. You'll be exhausted. You'll be humiliated. And you'll still have the coupon." Boren looked at the basket. He looked at his party. He looked at his missing boot. "Fine," he said. "Deal." The adventurers took the basket. They followed the map. They exited the dungeon 30 minutes later, tired, confused, and in possession of 4 protein bars, a coupon, and a story that nobody at the Adventurers Guild would believe. Jerry watched them go. He updated his log. Adventurer Incursion Number 2 status. Resolved. Nonviolent outcome adventurers. 4 times spent. 3 hours, 12 minutes loot lost. 1 coupon. For protein bars loot gained. 1 adventurer's boot. Left. Notes. The boot is now in the break room. Glibble tried to wear it. It did not fit. He was sad. Jerry looked at the notification. He looked at the maze. He looked at the boot. "We're going to need more furniture," he said. Grubnak, standing beside him, nodded solemnly. I'll start drawing blueprints. You can't read. I'll start drawing pictures. That's fine. Somewhere in the building, Mr. Petroselli was still shouting. The elevator was still not working. The squirrel was still in the vents. And Jerry Fitch, dungeon lord of the most absurd dungeon in existence, was starting to think he might actually be good at this. Chapter 5, Mr. Petroselli's Redemption Arc, or The Eternal Petroselli, Warden of the Third Floor. Vito Petroselli had been a landlord for 37 years. He had seen things. He had evicted a tenant who kept a full-sized horse in a one-bedroom apartment. He had collected rent from a man who paid exclusively in unmarked bills and smelled faintly of ozone. He had once found a full suit of medieval armor in a storage unit and had not asked questions, because in the Petroselli Arms, you learn not to ask questions. But nothing in his 37 years of property management had prepared him for becoming a dungeon boss. The first day had been spent screaming. The second day had been spent screaming louder. By the third day, his voice had given out, and he had moved on to furious silence, which was somehow more terrifying. He sat on his throne of rent notices in his boss arena on floor 1, arms crossed, eyes burning with the kind of rage that only comes from being involuntarily reassigned to a role you never applied for. He had also, on the second day, discovered that the system had given him a legendary vacuum cleaner. It was called the Eternal Vacuum of Reckoning, and it was described as a cleaning implement of immense and terrible power, can suck the very soul from a man's body. Also excellent on carpets. He had not used it yet. He was saving it, not for combat, for the moment when he finally got his hands on the person responsible for this mess. That moment arrived on Friday morning. Jerry descended the stairs to floor 1 with a peace offering. The peace offering was a cup of coffee from his regular French press, which he had managed to rescue from his apartment before the dungeon had fully consumed it. Mr. Petroselli was waiting for him. He was seated on his throne, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. The vacuum cleaner stood beside him like a loyal dog. It hummed with barely contained power. Mr. Fitch, Petroselli said. His voice was hoarse from 2 days of screaming. This did not make it any less intimidating. Mr. Petroselli, I brought you coffee. I don't want your coffee. It's from the good beans, the ones I keep in the freezer. Mr. Petroselli's eye twitched. He had strong opinions about coffee. He had once evicted a tenant for using instant coffee in the communal kitchen. He took the cup. They sat in silence for a moment, the dungeon lord and the dungeon boss, drinking coffee in a boss arena that used to be the building's lobby. The green torches flickered. The treasure chest in the corner, which Jerry had filled with old DVDs and a single gold coin he had found in a parking lot, sat untouched. I'm going to kill you, Mr. Petroselli said, without particular emphasis. I understand. When I'm done, I'm going to resurrect you and kill you again. That seems excessive. Nothing is excessive. I am a landlord. I have been a landlord for 37 years. I have never missed a rent collection. I have never failed to respond to a maintenance request within 72 hours. I have built a reputation. And now, he gestured at the boss arena. I am a dungeon boss. I guard treasure. I fight heroes. I have a legendary vacuum cleaner. The Eternal Vacuum of Reckoning. Yes, that's what it's called. I read the description. It can suck the soul from a man's body. Do you know what I used it for yesterday? I vacuumed the boss arena. Because I had nothing else to do. Because no adventurers have come to fight me. Because apparently they're all getting lost in your furniture maze and leaving with protein bars. It's a very effective strategy. It's an infuriating strategy. I want to fight someone. I want to use the vacuum. I want to feel powerful and important and feared. And instead I'm sitting here, drinking your coffee, watching you ruin my professional legacy. Jerry considered this. He took a sip of his own coffee. Mr. Petroselli, can I ask you something? No. Too bad. I'm asking anyway. When was the last time you took a day off? Mr. Petroselli's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. Exactly, Jerry said. You've been running this building for 37 years. You've never taken a vacation. You've never delegated. You've never once let anyone else handle the rent collection. You're the most dedicated landlord I've ever met. But dedication isn't the same as happiness. I don't need to be happy. I need to be respected. You can be both. The system gave you a boss arena. It gave you a legendary vacuum cleaner. It gave you the authority to fight adventurers and protect the dungeon. That's not a demotion. That's a promotion. You're not just the landlord of the Petrocelli Arms anymore. You're the warden of Floor 1, the first line of defense, the face of the dungeon. Mr. Petrocelli stared at him. The vacuum hummed. I haven't had a day off in 14 years, he said quietly. I know. I haven't seen my sister's family since 2019. I keep meaning to visit. I never do. You could visit now? I can handle the dungeon for a few days. The system says I can't leave my post. I'm bonded to the boss arena. Jerry smiled. It was the smile of a man who had read the terms and conditions. Section 8, subsection D. Dungeon bosses are granted leave for personal reasons provided they file Form 7B with the Dungeon Corps at least 48 hours in advance. The form is in the system database. I looked it up. You looked it up. I looked up everything. I read the terms. I found the loopholes. I filed the paperwork. You're approved for a 3-day weekend starting next Friday. Mr. Petrocelli was silent for a long time. The vacuum cleaner hummed. The green torches flickered. Somewhere in the vents, the squirrel chittered. You read the terms, Mr. Petrocelli said finally. Yes. You found the leave clause. Yes. You filed the paperwork for me. Yes. Why? Jerry shrugged. Because you're my dungeon boss. But you're also my landlord. And I've been late on rent exactly once in 3 years, and you didn't evict me. You gave me a warning. You gave me an extra week. You were fair. I remember. Mr. Petrocelli looked down at his coffee cup. He looked at his vacuum cleaner. He looked at his throne, made of rent notices and old lease agreements. I'm still angry, he said. I know. But I'm less angry than I was. That's a start. I want a corner office. Jerry blinked. A corner office? I'm a dungeon boss. I have a legendary vacuum cleaner. I deserve a corner office with a window. Even if the window looks out onto a dungeon corridor. I want a window. I'll see what I can do. And I want a title. You already have a title. You're the dungeon boss of Floor 1. I want a better title. Something with authority. Something that strikes fear into the hearts of adventurers. Jerry thought about it. How about the Eternal Petrocelli, warden of the 3rd floor? I'm on Floor 1. The warden of the 1st floor doesn't have the same ring to it. Trust me, I've written marketing copy. The 3rd floor sounds more impressive. Mr. Petrocelli considered this. Fine. The Eternal Petrocelli, warden of the 3rd floor. It's acceptable, but I'm holding you to that corner office. I'll put in a request with the Dungeon Corps. They shook hands. It was not a warm handshake. It was the handshake of 2 men who had reached a grudging mutual understanding. But it was a start. As Jerry climbed the stairs back to his Dungeon Corps chamber, the system pinged. Dungeon Boss Relations Update Boss. Veto Eternal Petrocelli. Petrocelli status. Pacified. Temporary. Morale. Grudgingly cooperative notes. The warden of the 3rd floor has accepted his role. He has also requested a corner office. This request has been forwarded to the Architecture Department. The Architecture Department does not exist. We are not sure what to do about this. Jerry smiled. He was building something here. It wasn't a normal dungeon. It wasn't a normal management structure. It wasn't anything that the system had planned for. But it was working. As he walked back through the dungeon corridors, he passed by the various denizens who were slowly adapting to their new lives. Linda Hargrove from 7 Beta had set up a small training area for dungeon mimics that hadn't spawned yet. She was practicing with rocks, which she tossed gently into the air while murmuring encouragement. "You can be anything you want to be," she was saying to a particularly round stone. "A chest, a door, a very ambitious breadbox. The sky's the limit." Marcus Chun from 6 Alpha had taken to his trap maintenance role with unexpected enthusiasm. Jerry found him in a side corridor, installing what appeared to be a pit trap with a safety rail. "What's that?" Jerry asked. "Pit trap," Marcus said. "Standard dungeon hazard. But I'm adding a grab bar on the side, so if someone falls in, they can climb out. And a cushion at the bottom. And a small light so they can see where they're going." "Doesn't that defeat the purpose of a trap?" "Safety first. I'm an engineer. I can't build something that's designed to hurt people. It's against my professional ethics." Jerry had looked at the pit trap, now equipped with a safety rail, a warning sign, a cushion landing zone, and an emergency ladder, and decided that this was fine. This was absolutely fine. His dungeon was becoming the safest death trap in existence. He continued walking. On floor 2, he passed Sergei Volkov, who had built himself a small guard post next to a trapdoor and was sitting in it, reading a Russian novel and occasionally glancing at the trapdoor with the satisfied expression of a man who had found his true calling. "Any adventurers?" Jerry asked. "Not today," Sergei said, not looking up from his book. "But I am ready. When they come, I will guard. I will protect. I will." He paused, searching for the word. "Trapdoor." "That's very dedicated of you." "I have been waiting for this my entire life. In Russia, I was an accountant. Boring. Safe. No trapdoors. Now I have purpose." Jerry had left Sergei to his book and his trapdoor, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. His dungeon was a mess. It was a beautiful, absurd, wonderful mess. And it was his. On the floor below, Mr. Petroselli sat on his throne of rent notices, the eternal vacuum of reckoning at his side, and for the first time in 14 years, he started thinking about what he would do with a weekend off. He decided he would visit his sister. He would eat her cooking. He would complain about the traffic. He would be a normal person, if only for 3 days. It was, he realized, the most hopeful he had felt since the world had ended and he had become a dungeon boss. On floor 3, Kevin the floor decoration was still standing very still in the corridor. Nobody had moved him. Nobody had spoken to him. He was starting to wonder if anyone remembered he was there. They did not. The squirrel remembered, but the squirrel was not telling. Chapter 6: The Gelatinous Cube and Other Parenting Decisions. Gerald Jr. spawned on a Saturday. Jerry had been a dungeon lord for 5 days. He had negotiated a goblin labor contract. He had built a furniture maze. He had pacified a dungeon boss. He had successfully resolved 4 adventurer incursions without a single death. He was feeling good. He was feeling confident. He was feeling like maybe he understood this whole dungeon management thing. Then the system informed him that a new denizen was spawning, and it was a gelatinous cube, and it was going to appear in his dungeon core chamber. "Oh no," Jerry said. The air in front of him shimmered. Light coalesced. Molecules assembled themselves into a shape that was approximately 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. It was translucent. It was gelatinous. It was, in every measurable way, a cube made of slime. It was also, Jerry realized with mounting horror, adorable. The gelatinous cube wobbled. It made a sound like a gentle belch. It wobbled again and extruded a pseudopod in Jerry's direction, waving it like a tentative greeting. "No," Jerry said. "No, no, no. You're a monster. You're a killing machine. You dissolve things. You're supposed to be terrifying." The cube wobbled. It made the belch sound again. It shifted its translucent body, and Jerry could see something inside it, a half-dissolved cheese cracker. "That's my cheese cracker," Jerry said. "I've been looking for that." The cube, Gerald Jr., as the system had already labeled it in Jerry's interface, pulsed contentedly. It had eaten the cheese cracker. It had liked the cheese cracker. It wanted more cheese crackers. "I'm not feeding you." The cube wobbled sadly. Don't give me that look. You don't even have eyes. How are you giving me a look? The cube wobbled more sadly. Fine. 1 cheese cracker. But that's it. He tossed a cheese cracker into the cube's gelatinous body. The cube absorbed it. It pulsed happily. It wobbled across the floor and positioned itself in the corner of the room, where it sat like a particularly enthusiastic houseplant. The system pinged. New denizen spawned. Gelatinous cube designation, Gerald Jr. Status, juvenile morale. Content, fed. Notes. This is not standard gelatinous cube behavior. Standard gelatinous cubes are aggressive, territorial, and dissolve organic matter on contact. This one appears to have bonded with the dungeon lord. The system is unsure how to process this. Yeah, Jerry said. Join the club. The problem with Gerald Jr. was not that he was dangerous. He was, technically, very dangerous. A full-grown gelatinous cube could dissolve a fully armored knight in seconds, and even a juvenile like Gerald Jr. could give a nasty acid burn to anyone who touched his translucent body. The problem was that Gerald Jr. did not seem to know he was dangerous. He followed Jerry everywhere. He wobbled through the dungeon corridors, leaving a trail of slime that the goblins had learned to avoid. He sat in the corner of the dungeon core chamber, pulsing gently, watching Jerry work. He ate cheese crackers. He ate anything Jerry gave him. Actually, cheese crackers, pretzels, a stale bagel that had been in the break room since before the integration event. He's not very threatening, Grubnak observed, standing at a safe distance from the cube. He looks like a fish tank that got lost. He's a baby, Jerry said. He'll grow. Eventually he'll be big enough to dissolve an entire adventuring party. Will he, though? Will he really? He spends all his time eating cheese crackers and following you around. He's not a dungeon denizen. He's a pet. He's a pet with acidic properties. That doesn't make him scarier. That makes him a hazard to anyone who tries to pet him. Jerry looked at Gerald Jr. The cube wobbled. It extruded a pseudopod and waved at him. He needs a job, Jerry said. What? A purpose. He's a dungeon denizen. He's supposed to contribute. Right now he's just sitting in the corner, absorbing cheese crackers, and being cute. We need to find him a role. A role? Yes, something he can do that takes advantage of his natural abilities. He's a gelatinous cube. He can dissolve things. He can block corridors. He's basically a living, breathing, well, not breathing, hazard. You want to use him as a trap. I want to use him as a hazard. There's a difference. Traps are intentional. Hazards are natural, like a puddle of acid, or a gelatinous cube that blocks the corridor. You're going to put him in the maze. I'm going to put him in the maze, but not as a killer, as a deterrent. Adventurers will see him, realize they can't get past him without getting dissolved, and turn around. He doesn't even have to fight. He just has to exist. Grubnak considered this. That's actually not a terrible plan. Thank you. It is, however, a terrible plan for Gerald Jr. Why? Because if you put him in the maze, he'll get lonely. He follows you everywhere. He's bonded to you. If you leave him alone in a corridor, he'll just follow you back. Jerry looked at Gerald Jr. The cube wobbled. Jerry walked to the door of the dungeon core chamber. The cube wobbled after him. Jerry walked back to his desk. The cube wobbled back. He has separation anxiety, Jerry said. He's a gelatinous cube with separation anxiety. This is our lives now. We need to work on this. You're his union representative. Goblins are denizens too. Denizens have a duty to support each other. Grubnak stared at him. I'm a goblin. He's a cube. We have nothing in common. You're both dungeon denizens. You both work for me. You both eat cheese crackers. I do not eat cheese crackers. You ate 3 yesterday. Grubnak's ears turned a shade of green that suggested embarrassment. Those were from the communal bowl. I thought they were for everyone. They were in my desk drawer. The desk drawer is not clearly labeled. It's my desk, in my dungeon core chamber. Everything in that room is mine. The terms and conditions say that dungeon resources are shared equally among all denizens. Jerry narrowed his eyes. You read the terms and conditions? No, but I heard you reading them out loud. I memorized the parts that benefit me. Smart. Thank you. They looked at Gerald Jr. The cube was now trying to absorb a piece of lint from the floor. It was taking the lint very seriously. Fine, Jerry said. Gerald Jr. stays in the dungeon core chamber for now, but we need to start training him. Eventually, he needs to be able to function on his own. We can't have a gelatinous cube with separation anxiety. I'll add it to the union agenda. The union has an agenda? We elected a secretary. Glibble can write. Sort of. He knows 3 letters. That seems inadequate for a secretary. He's the best we have. The other candidate couldn't stop eating the ballot box. Jerry sighed. Fine. Put it on the agenda. We'll address it at the next meeting. The next meeting is tomorrow. I know. You scheduled it. I know. Why did you schedule it? Because the system requires me to maintain positive denizen morale, and regular meetings are proven to improve workplace satisfaction. I read a study. This is a dungeon. I'm aware. Goblins don't have workplace satisfaction. Goblins have workplace survival. Things have changed. We have dental now. Grubnak opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. We do have dental, he said. I keep forgetting about the dental. See? Progress. Grubnak shook his head and walked back toward the maze. Gerald Jr. wobbled in the corner, having successfully absorbed the lint. The cube was satisfied. The cube was content. The cube was not, in any meaningful sense, a threat to anyone. Jerry was okay with that. The problem with having a gelatinous cube as a pet became apparent on the 3rd day. Gerald Jr. was growing. It was not dramatic growth. He was not suddenly transforming into a 15-foot-tall monstrosity that would consume the entire dungeon. But he was definitely bigger than he had been when he spawned. His body, which had been roughly 4 feet in each dimension, was now closer to 5. His translucent interior had developed faint swirls of color, blue and green and gold, that pulsed with his gentle heartbeat. You're growing, Jerry said, examining him one morning. Gerald Jr. wobbled. He extruded a pseudopod and bumped it against Jerry's hand. The pseudopod was warm and slightly sticky. You're going to be a big cube someday. Gerald Jr. made the belch sound. A cheese cracker, partially dissolved, appeared near his center. You're also messy. The cube wobbled apologetically. Jerry had to start planning for Gerald Jr.'s future. A full-grown gelatinous cube could reach 12 feet in each dimension. It could dissolve anything organic. It was, in its mature form, one of the most dangerous dungeon denizens in existence. But Gerald Jr. was not being raised as a weapon. He was being raised as whatever he was turning out to be. I need to build you a proper room, Jerry said. Somewhere you can grow without blocking the corridors. The cube wobbled happily. But you also need training. Real training. You can't just be a cheese cracker disposal unit forever. Gerald Jr. considered this. Then he extruded a different pseudopod, this one longer, more deliberate, and pointed at the dungeon interface, where a new notification had appeared. Gelatinous Cube Training Module. Unlock your gelatinous cube has reached the juvenile stage. The following training paths are now available. Path of Consumption, increased dissolving capability. Path of Protection, increased defensive capability. Path of Utility, non-combat applications. Path of Unknown, requires further bonding. Note, standard gelatinous cubes do not have training paths. Your cube is developing in non-standard ways. The system is monitoring this development with scientific interest. You have training paths, Jerry said. Like a Pokemon. Gerald Jr. wobbled. He did not know what a Pokemon was, but he was excited anyway. Jerry selected Path of Utility, not because it was the most powerful option, because it seemed the most likely to keep Gerald Jr. happy and healthy. If the cube could learn to do useful things, carry items, block specific corridors on command, maybe learn to not dissolve paperwork, he would be an asset without being a weapon. The training module loaded. Gerald Jr.'s body rippled. The colors inside him shifted, aligning into new patterns. Training initiated. Path of Utility new ability unlocked. Selective dissolution. Your gelatinous cube can now choose what to dissolve and what to leave untouched. He will no longer accidentally dissolve important documents, cheese cracker wrappers, or small woodland creatures. New ability unlocked. Stretch. Your gelatinous cube can now extend his body to reach objects up to 10 feet away. He can retrieve items, block passages, and give surprisingly effective hugs. Gerald Jr. demonstrated his new abilities immediately. He stretched his body across the room, reaching the desk where Jerry kept the cheese crackers. He delicately picked up one cracker, without dissolving it, and retracted, depositing the cracker in his own center. "That's incredible," Jerry said. The cube belched contentedly. It had learned. It had grown. And it had done so without hurting anyone or anything. Jerry looked at Gerald Jr. with something that felt suspiciously like pride. He had spawned a monster and turned it into a companion. He had taken a creature designed for destruction and given it a path to something better. If he could do that for a gelatinous cube, what else could he do? The system pinged at midnight. Jerry was asleep in the dungeon core chamber, having converted his old couch into a makeshift bed. The dungeon core pulsed gently in the corner, casting soft blue light across the room. Gerald Jr. was parked next to the couch, pulsing in rhythm with the core, making a gentle squelching sound that was surprisingly soothing. The ping woke him. Dungeon Status Report. Week 1 Adventurer Incursions, 2 Adventurer Fatalities, 0 Denizen Fatalities, 0 Denizen Morale. Content Dungeon Lord Morale, stressed, but managing, territory, floors 1 to 3, stable, mana pool, 82 100ths level progress, 64% to level 3. Notes: this dungeon is operating at unusually high efficiency for a level 1 establishment. Adventurer survival rate, 100%. This is unprecedented. The system recommends introducing more lethal hazards to maintain standard dungeon difficulty curves. Alternatively, the system acknowledges that this approach is technically within operational parameters and will not intervene at this time. Additional note: the gelatinous cube designated Gerald Jr. has been flagged for behavioral observation. Standard gelatinous cubes do not exhibit attachment behaviors. This may be a mutation. The system is fascinated and slightly concerned. Global Incident Alert. Dungeon Seed Caliph the Ashbringer reports Adventurer Incursion resolved. 15 fatalities. Dungeon Ranking. Violence output now top 1%. System note: this represents adequate dungeon performance. This is what dungeon seeds are supposed to do. Jerry read both notifications. The status report. The global alert. 15 fatalities. 1 dungeon's weak output, measured in bodies. His dungeon's weak output, measured in cheese crackers and union negotiations, and a gelatinous cube that had learned not to dissolve paperwork. He looked at Gerald Jr. The cube was pulsing gently, its amber swirls shifting in the dim light of the dungeon core, making the soft squelching sound that Jerry had come to think of as breathing. It had never dissolved anyone. It probably never would. "Good night, Gerald Jr., Jerry mumbled. The cube pulsed. It made the gentle belch sound. Jerry smiled and fell asleep, the dungeon lord of a dungeon that was breaking every rule in the book, and he could not have been more proud. Chapter 7: The Goblin Union files a grievance. The formal grievance arrived on a Monday, which was the worst day for grievances because Jerry had designated Fridays as Grievance Processing Day, and Mondays as existential dread day. And Grubnak either hadn't read the union bylaws or had read them and decided they didn't apply to grievances that were particularly grievous. It was written on a napkin, in crayon. The crayon was green, which was either a political statement or the only crayon Glibble could find. The napkin read, "Immediate grievance. Bookshelf in maze wobbles." Glibble almost died. He did not die, but it was close. Also, the break room has no breaks in it. Also, Gerald Jr. ate the complaint box. Signed Grubnak, Union Steward. P.S. This is serious. Jerry read the napkin 3 times. He looked at Grubnak, who was standing in the doorway of the dungeon core chamber with his arms crossed and his soup pot helmet slightly askew, radiating the energy of a Union steward who had been waiting his entire life for something to grieve about. "This says grievance," Jerry said. Glibble wrote it. He knows 3 letters. I told you this. You could have written it. I am the Union steward. I delegate. It's in the contract. It's not in the contract. It will be. Jerry sighed. Gerald Jr. wobbled in the corner, having recently grown to 5.5 feet per dimension and developing a faint amber tint that the system had described as mildly concerning but probably fine. The cube had, in fact, eaten the complaint box. It had been a cardboard box with a slot cut in the top, and Gerald Jr. had apparently decided it looked like a very large cheese cracker. "Fine," Jerry said. "Let's inspect the bookshelf." The wobbly bookshelf was located in Sector 7 of the furniture maze, which Grubnak had recently renamed the Corridor of Existential Uncertainty, after hearing Marcus Chin use the phrase and deciding it sounded official. The bookshelf in question was a Billy model, birch veneer, circa 2019, and it was indeed wobbling. Specifically, it wobbled every time someone walked past it, which was concerning because goblins walked past it approximately 40 times per day during their assigned patrol routes. "This is a safety hazard," Grubnak said. "It's a Billy bookshelf. They all wobble. It's IKEA. The contract says the dungeon lord shall provide a safe working environment." Section 4, subsection B. You wrote that section. I let you write it because you promised it would be mostly reasonable. It is mostly reasonable. The bookshelf is mostly wobbling. The contract is clear. Jerry looked at the bookshelf. He looked at Grubnak. He looked at Gerald Jr., who had followed them into the maze and was now trying to absorb a loose screw from the floor. "Fine. I'll have Marcus reinforce it. Also the break room." "What about the break room?" "There is no break room. We have been taking breaks in the broom closet with Sergey. Sergey is very territorial about his broom closet. He keeps saying this is not break room. This is supply closet. I guard supplies. It is not relaxing." "You want a break room?" "We want a break room. With a chair. And a sign that says break room. And maybe a plant. Goblins like plants." Jerry made a note on his mental notepad, which was getting very full. "Anything else?" "The complaint box replacement. We need a new one." Gerald Jr. ate the old one because it looked like a cheese cracker. He has eaten 4 things this week that were not cheese crackers. The complaint box, a welcome mat, one of Marcus's safety rails, and a hat that belonged to Sergey. Sergey is still angry about the hat. I'll talk to Gerald Jr. about his diet. You have been saying that for 3 days. I've been meaning to. I've been busy. You've been reorganizing your spreadsheet of system loopholes. That's important work. It's a spreadsheet. It's a very organized spreadsheet. Marcus Chin arrived with his toolbox, which was not a toolbox in the traditional sense, but a carefully organized system of compartments and pouches that he wore like a vest, because Marcus Chin was an engineer, and engineers do not simply carry tools. They wear them as an expression of identity. The wobbly bookshelf, he said, examining it with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. I can fix this, but I need to know the load-bearing specifications. It's a bookshelf in a dungeon maze, Jerry said. Everything is load-bearing when you think about it. What if an adventurer leans on it? What if two adventurers lean on it? What if a gelatinous cube decides to lean on it, hypothetically? Gerald Jr. wobbled innocently. I'll need to install cross-bracing, a triangular support structure, maybe a warning sign indicating maximum load capacity, possibly a secondary support beam in case the primary fails, and a third beam in case the secondary fails. Redundancy is key. How long will that take? 3 hours. For if I do the safety rails too. There are no safety rails. There will be. Marcus opened his toolbox vest and began removing tools with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally found a dungeon that appreciated his specific skill set. Jerry left him to it and turned his attention to the more pressing matter, the break room. The broom closet, or supply storage facility 7, as Sergei had labeled it with a piece of masking tape and a marker, was located on floor 2, near the secondary stairwell. It contained a mop, a bucket, 3 bottles of cleaning solution that predated the integration event, Sergei's folding chair, Sergei's Russian novel, currently, The Master and Margarita, and Sergei himself, who was sitting in the chair with his arms crossed and his expression set to implacable. This is supply closet, Sergei said, without being asked. I guard supplies. Sergei, the goblins need a break room. Not my problem. I guard supplies. The supply closet is the only room with a chair. The chair is for supply guarding. Guarding requires sitting. Sitting requires chair. Can the goblins use the chair when you're not guarding? Sergei considered this. When am I not guarding? You sleep? In shifts. I have developed a system. 3 hours guard, 1 hour sleep. 3 hours guard, 1 hour sleep. The supplies are safe. What supplies? It's a mop and a bucket. A mop and a bucket that are safe. Because of me. Jerry looked at the mop. The mop looked back. It did not look grateful. Mops, Jerry was learning, were notoriously ungrateful creatures. Fine. Keep the supply closet. I'll build the goblins a break room somewhere else. Sergei nodded, satisfied. Good. You understand. This is supply closet. For supplies. Guarding happens here. Jerry made another mental note. His mental notepad was now approximately the size of a legal document. He was considering transferring it to a physical notepad, but the physical notepad had been absorbed by Gerald Jr. last Tuesday. The Adventurers Guild correspondence arrived via system notification at 3 in the afternoon. It was marked Formal Notice, Do Not Ignore, in a font that suggested the guild had recently discovered bold text and was very excited about it. From Adventurers Guild, Dungeon Standards Committee 2, Dungeon Seed, Gerald Fitch, Petrocelli Arms, Subject, Formal Notification of Upcoming Dungeon Inspection. Esteemed Dungeon Lord, in accordance with Guild Charter Section 14, Subsection F, this notification serves as formal notice that a Dungeon Standards Inspector will visit your premises within the next 14 business days. The purpose of this inspection is to evaluate your dungeon's compliance with the Minimum Dungeon Quality Standards, MDQS, as outlined in the Guild Accreditation Handbook, version 3.2. Areas of evaluation include dungeon aesthetics. Are your corridors sufficiently ominous? Monster diversity. Do you have at least 3 distinct species? Loot quality. Is your treasure worth risking death over? Boss fight experience. Is your boss encounter memorable? Adventurer satisfaction, post-dungeon survey average score. Please prepare accordingly. Failure to meet MDQS standards may result in delisting from the Guild's recommended dungeon registry, which would significantly impact your adventurer traffic. Yours in Dungeon Excellence. The Dungeon Standards Committee, members, 11 bureaucrats, 2 retired adventurers, and a sentient quill. Jerry read the notification. He read it again. He looked at Grubnak, who had been reading over his shoulder. We're being inspected, Jerry said. We do not have monster diversity. We have goblins. And a cube. The cube counts as a species. It counts as a species that eats complaint boxes. The guild doesn't know that. They will. The sentient quill will figure it out. Sentient quills are very perceptive. Jerry looked at the notification again. Minimum dungeon quality standards. We don't meet any of these. Our corridors are ominous. They're corridors in an apartment building that we converted into a furniture maze. That's very ominous. Furniture is the scariest thing there is. That's not a guild position. That's your personal opinion. It should be a guild position. Incursion number 3 arrived while Jerry was still processing the inspection notice. The system pinged. Incoming adventurer. Classification, level 7 bard. Estimated arrival, 60 seconds. A bard, Jerry said. That's new. The adventurer entered the dungeon with a flourish. He was tall, thin, wearing a cape that was made of what appeared to be theater curtains, and carrying a lute that had clearly been dropped at least once and repaired with duct tape. His name, according to the system overlay, was Melodious Max. His intelligence was 12. His charisma was 19. His primary motivation for dungeon delving was to find inspiration for the greatest ballad ever written, a song so powerful it will make dragons weep and kings abdicate. Greetings, Dungeon Lord. Max bellowed, striking a chord on his lute that was only slightly out of tune. I am Melodious Max, Bard of the Seven Kingdoms, Seeker of the Eternal Melody, and— Please sign the waiver, Jerry said, pointing at the welcome desk. Max looked at the waiver. He looked at Jerry. He strummed his lute. Sign the waiver, he sang. A request most fair. The melody of paperwork floats upon the air. That's not necessary. Just initial next to the fireball clause. Max read the waiver. He initialed next to the fireball clause. He initialed next to the lost limbs clause. He initialed next to the existential dread clause, because he was, despite his theatrics, a professional. I require inspiration, he said, setting down the waiver. A dungeon of darkness, of terror, of furniture maze, Jerry said. Of furniture? Goblins with a union contract. A disgruntled landlord with a legendary vacuum cleaner. A gelatinous cube that eats complaint boxes. A Russian supply closet guardian. And Kevin. Who is Kevin? Nobody knows. He stands on floor 3. He has accepted his fate. Melodious Max's eyes widened. He strummed his lute. A chord that was slightly less out of tune than the previous one echoed through the entrance chamber. This is it, he shouted. The inspiration I have sought. Not darkness and terror, but bureaucracy. Union contracts. The mundane made magnificent. That's one way to look at it. What key would best convey the existential weight of a gelatinous cube that eats complaint boxes? D minor, the saddest of all keys. Max nodded solemnly. You understand music, Dungeon Lord. I understand that complaint boxes shouldn't look like cheese crackers. Max spent the next 4 hours touring the dungeon. He interviewed Grubnak about the labor contract, a song of solidarity. Of goblins rising, he'd exclaimed, and Grubnak had been so moved he'd offered Max one of his cheese crackers. He interviewed Sergei about the supply closet, a ballad of vigilance, of mops guarded against all odds. Sergei had not been moved, but had allowed Max to sit in the chair for exactly 2 minutes. And he interviewed Kevin, who had stood perfectly still and said only, I observe. That's the chorus. Max had screamed and run out of the dungeon in a state of creative euphoria, leaving behind a signed waiver, a tip of 3 gold coins, and a promise to return when the ballad was complete. The system pinged. Incident log. Adventurer incursion number 3 status. Resolved. Nonviolent outcome assessment. Adventurer departed after receiving creative inspiration. Conclusion. Technically satisfactory. Reward. +100 experience points. Bonus. plus 15 denizen morale. The goblins enjoyed being interviewed. 3 down, Jerry said. 2 to go for the trial period. The inspection is still coming, Grubnak said. I know. 14 business days. I know. We don't have monster diversity. We'll figure it out. How? Jerry looked at Gerald Jr., who was trying to absorb a dust bunny. He looked at the maze, where Marcus was installing his 4th cross brace on the wobbly Billy. He looked at the broom closet, where Sergei was polishing his mop with the intensity of a museum curator. Same way we figure out everything, he said. We're going to read the fine print, fill out the forms, and find the loopholes. The package arrived at sunset. It was not delivered by the system. It was not delivered by the guild. It was delivered by a courier in a plain brown uniform who seemed confused about where he was, handed a small box to the first goblin he encountered, Glibble, who was on break room guard duty despite the break room not existing yet, and left without waiting for a signature. The box contained a single brass hinge. It was old, polished, and warm to the touch, the kind of brass that had been handled by many hands over many years. There was no note, no return address, no explanation. There was only the hinge, and, pressed into the bottom of the box, a business card. Matte black, silver text, anticipating your success. No name, no address, nothing else. Jerry turned the card over in his hands. He looked at the brass hinge. He looked at the card again. Is it a threat? Grubnak asked. I don't know. It's not specific enough to be a threat. Is it a gift? I don't know. It's not friendly enough to be a gift. So what is it? Jerry thought about it. A notification, he said. Someone is telling us that they know we're here, that they've been watching, that they have things to give us when they decide the time is right. He placed the card in the hinge in a drawer. He labeled the drawer. Concerns, pending. The inspection is still coming, Grubnak said. I know. We also now have a mysterious brass hinge from an anonymous benefactor who may or may not be hostile. I know. And the guild wants monster diversity. I know. Grubnak's ears twitched. The dental plan is very good, he admitted. I know. It covers cleanings. I know. Grubnak stopped. You're going to use the dental plan to pass the inspection somehow, aren't you? Jerry did not answer. He was already reading the guild accreditation handbook. Somewhere on floor 3, Kevin stood perfectly still and observed everything. In the supply closet, Sergei was adding a second lock. And in the newly reinforced Sector 7 of the corridor of existential uncertainty, a Billy bookshelf stood firm for the first time since its assembly, secure in the knowledge that it would never wobble again. Or so it thought. The bookshelf, like Jerry, was about to learn that nothing in this dungeon was ever truly stable for long. Chapter 8: The Hag, the Engineer, and the Russian. Mrs. Patterson had been a hag before the system made it official. She had been a hag for approximately 68 years, by her own estimate, and she had refined hagdom to an art form. Her apartment on floor 3, Unit 6 Beta, had been transformed by the integration event into something that was part witch's cottage, part psychological warfare installation, and part aggressive knitting studio. She had been knitting when the system activated. She was still knitting. She would always be knitting. The knitting was eternal. Jerry visited her on Tuesday morning because the guild inspection was now 13 business days away, and the monster diversity requirement was weighing on his mind like a particularly heavy piece of furniture. Mrs. Patterson was officially classified as a hag, which was a recognized monster category, and Jerry needed to know if she was willing to be part of the dungeon's active defense rotation. He knocked on her door. There was no answer. He knocked again. Something that sounded like a cat, but was definitely not a cat, hissed from behind the door. Mrs. Patterson? It's Jerry, from 7 Alpha, the Dungeon Lord. The door creaked open. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway. She was short, round, and wearing a cardigan that appeared to have been knitted from the concentrated essence of grandmotherly disapproval. Her glasses were perched on her nose in a way that suggested they had been there since before Jerry was born. She was holding knitting needles that were, Jerry noticed with some alarm, glowing faintly. "Mr. Fitch," she said. Her voice was the auditory equivalent of a strongly worded letter. "You've let the hallway light flicker for 3 days. I've been meaning to speak with you about it." The hallway light is a green torch. It's supposed to flicker. It's atmospheric. It's annoying. I'm trying to knit a sweater for my grandson, and the inconsistent lighting is affecting my stitch tension. Your grandson? You have a grandson. He lives in Ohio. He doesn't know I'm a hag now. I haven't figured out how to tell him. It's not the kind of thing you put in a Christmas card. Jerry nodded sympathetically. He knew something about having life circumstances that were difficult to explain in greeting card format. "Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to talk to you about the dungeon. Specifically, about helping with adventurer encounters. The guild requires monster diversity, and you're classified as a hag." "Yes, I read the system notification. It said she was already a hag. The system just made it official. I found that very rude. The system is not known for its tact. The system is not known for anything. It's a 40,000-year-old automated bureaucracy. I've dealt with the Department of Motor Vehicles. This is the same thing, but with more torches." Jerry couldn't argue with that. "What exactly would you want me to do?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her knitting needles clicking. "Jump out and say boo? Cackle menacingly? Offer adventurers a poisoned apple?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. This is my first dungeon. I'm figuring it out as I go." Clearly, she clicked her needles twice. "Fine, I'll help, but I have conditions." "Conditions?" 1. I want better lighting in my corridor. The green torches hurt my eyes. 2. I want a sign on my door that says, HAG, knock before entering. 3. I will not be doing any cackling. Cackling is a stereotype, and I find it offensive. Deal. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Don't thank me yet. I haven't told you what I'm going to do to the adventurers. Jerry paused. What are you going to do to the adventurers? Mrs. Patterson smiled. It was not a comforting smile. It was a smile that had been perfected over 68 years of practice, a smile that said, I know things about you that you don't even know about yourself. Knitting, she said. Lots and lots of knitting. She closed the door. The knot cat hissed again. Jerry stood in the flickering green torchlight, wondering what he had just agreed to. Incursion number 4 arrived at noon. According to the system overlay, his name was Sir Galahad the Pure. He was a level 9 paladin. His armor was so polished that Jerry could see his own reflection in it, and his reflection looked tired and slightly concerned. He carried a sword that glowed with holy light and a shield that had a prayer engraved on it. His intelligence was 14. His charisma was 16. His primary motivation for dungeon delving was to purify a den of evil and prove my worthiness to the Order of the Radiant Dawn. He refused to sign the waiver. I will not put my name to a document that acknowledges the legitimacy of a dungeon, Sir Galahad declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Dungeons are abominations. They are cancers upon the land. They must be cleansed, not negotiated with. Okay, Jerry said, but the waiver also covers lost car keys. You could lose your car keys in the maze. I do not drive. I ride a horse. The waiver covers horses. The horse stays outside. Then the horse doesn't need to sign. But you should. It's just good practice. Sir Galahad stared at Jerry with the expression of a man who had never been asked to fill out paperwork before purifying evil and was not sure how to process the experience. He signed the waiver. He did not initial next to the fireball clause. Jerry let it slide. Sir Galahad descended into the dungeon. He made it through the maze without incident, mostly because Marcus had installed safety railings along every possible path, and they were painted bright yellow, which made the maze significantly easier to navigate but also significantly more compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. He encountered Mrs. Patterson on floor 3. She was sitting in a rocking chair outside her apartment, knitting. The knitting needles glowed. The yarn was an unsettling shade of purple. The knot cat, which was actually a very small, very angry dragon that the system had assigned to her as a familiar, sat on her shoulder, glaring at the paladin with undisguised hostility. "Hello, young man," Mrs. Patterson said. "I am here to cleanse this dungeon of evil," Sir Galahad announced, raising his glowing sword. "That's nice, dear. Sit down. I have questions." "I will not." "Sit." Sir Galahad sat. He did not know why he sat. Later, he would tell his therapist that it was the most commanding single word he had ever heard, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had been making people sit down for 68 years and had never been refused. Mrs. Patterson continued knitting. The needles clicked. The dragon blinked. "How old are you, dear?" "I am 32 winters." 32 winters. That's a strange way to say 32 years old. Does the Order of the Radiant Dawn make you talk like that? It is the traditional mode of address. It's wordy. 32 years old is 3 words. 32 winters is still 3 words, but it's confusing. What if you were born in summer? I have never considered that. Of course you haven't. You're a paladin. You spend too much time thinking about purity and not enough time thinking about grammar. She clicked her needles. What do you actually want to be, dear? Not what the Order wants. Not what your father wanted. You. What do you actually want? Sir Galahad opened his mouth. His grip tightened on the sword. His expression shifted, not to the vulnerability of a man confessing a childhood dream, but to something harder. His holy blade flared brighter, not with anger, but with detection. The Birkvik, humming in its chamber on the floor above, had finally registered on divine sensors designed to flag corruption that predated language. "There is evil here," he said. His voice was different now, not the rehearsed paladin cadence. Something colder. I felt it when I entered. A presence. Ancient. Buried in the foundation of this place. It's not you, old woman. It's somewhere above us. In the heart of this dungeon. Mrs. Patterson's knitting needles stopped clicking. Percival the dragon's eyes narrowed. "Whatever you're sensing," she said carefully, "I don't think it's what you think it is." "I know exactly what I sensed." Sir Galahad stood. The chair scraped against stone. His sword burned white. A dungeon core. Corrupted. The system node that activated this place. It was never meant for this world. Whatever is powering this dungeon is wrong. And I am sworn to destroy wrongness. He strode past her toward the stairwell. Mrs. Patterson reached for her knitting needles, not to knit. The dragon on her shoulder unfurled wings that were much larger than they had appeared moments before. "Mr. Fitch," she said into a communication rune Jerry had installed the day before, at Marcus's insistence, with a safety manual. "You have a problem coming your way. Level 9 paladin. Sword glowing. Convinced the core is evil. I tried the questions approach. It didn't take." Jerry intercepted Sir Galahad in the dungeon core chamber. Gerald Jr. wobbled in front of the core, not strategically, but because the cube had been trying to absorb a dust bunny and had ended up there by accident. The coincidence made it look like the cube was protecting the core. Gerald Jr. was not protecting the core. Gerald Jr. was confused about why a man with a glowing sword was in the room. But the cube's presence, 7 feet of translucent gelatinous potential acidity, was enough to make Sir Galahad pause. "Move aside, creature," Galahad said. "I am not here for you." "He doesn't understand words," Jerry said. "He understands crackers. And wobbling. Mostly wobbling." "I am here for the core. It is corrupted." "The core is fine. It's been fine for 3 weeks. It mostly just sits there pulsing. It's very well behaved." "The corruption I sensed is real. My blade does not lie." "Your blade detected the system node. The thing that activated the dungeon. It's 40,000 years old and built by a dead civilization called the Architects. Is that corruption? Maybe. Is it evil? I don't think so. It's just old and confused and dealing with a lot of paperwork. Sir Galahad's sword did not dim. You would defend it. I would explain it. There's a difference. The difference is academic. Everything is academic if you think about it long enough. Galahad took a step forward. Gerald Jr. wobbled warningly. The cube did not know it was being warning. It was just wobbling. But the wobble was, in context, effective. I have been told all my life what evil looks like, Galahad said. They showed me pictures, diagrams, lists of behaviors. Evil is predictable, they said. Evil is recognizable. And then I come here, and I find a dungeon that has killed no one, a hag who knits, a goblin with a union, a cube that eats crackers and gives tours. None of it fits. None of it makes sense. And a voice in my head, the voice of the order, the voice of my father, the voice of 32 years of training, is screaming at me that this is the most dangerous kind of evil there is. The kind that doesn't look like evil. He raised his sword. The blade burned directly at the core. I don't know if it's evil, he said, but I know I was sent here to destroy it. And I don't know how to stop being the person they made me. The chamber went very quiet. Gerald Jr. stopped wobbling. And Kevin, who had been standing in the corner of the chamber since before the conversation started, perfectly still, observing, spoke. You are not asking the right question. Sir Galahad turned. Who are you? I am the floor 4 boss. But before that, I was the floor decoration. Before that, I was Kevin. I have observed everything in this dungeon for 3 weeks. I have seen 5 adventurers enter. 4 of them left different than they arrived. Not because they were defeated, because they were asked questions nobody had ever asked them before. Kevin paused. Mrs. Patterson asked you the wrong question. She asked what you wanted. The right question is, who told you that you're not allowed to want it? Sir Galahad stared at Kevin. Kevin stared back. Kevin was better at staring than anyone Sir Galahad had ever met, because Kevin had been practicing for 3 weeks, and Sir Galahad's training had mostly been in swordplay. The sword dimmed. Not much, just slightly. Nobody has ever told me I'm allowed, Galahad said. His voice was quieter now. That's not true, Kevin said. You told yourself. You just weren't listening. The sword went dark. Sir Galahad stood in the dungeon core chamber, the most dangerous paladin the dungeon had ever faced, disarmed not by combat, but by a man who had been standing still and taking notes. I don't know what to do now, Galahad said. Neither did I, Kevin said. For 3 weeks. Then someone gave me a desk. Galahad looked at the core. He looked at Jerry. He looked at Gerald Jr., who had resumed absorbing the dust bunny with quiet dedication. He looked at Kevin, who had returned to standing perfectly still. I need to think, Galahad said. Take your time, Jerry said. We have a coupon for the pizza place down the street. It's not much, but it's something. Sir Galahad took the coupon. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he sheathed his sword, not in surrender, but in deferral, and walked out of the dungeon. The system pinged. Incident log. Adventurer incursion number 4 status. Resolved. No inviolate, but close. Assessment. Adventurer departed in a state of professional and existential ambiguity. Core was not destroyed. Conclusion. Technically defeated. But the system is recommending enhanced core security. Reward. Plus 150 experience points. Bonus. New dungeon upgrade unlocked. Core sentry system. The system has never unlocked this for a level 1 dungeon before. The system is doing this as a precaution. The system would prefer if future adventurers do not get this close to the core. Jerry read the notification. He looked at Gerald Jr. You were protecting the core, he said. The cube wobbled. It made the belch sound. A half-dissolved dust bunny floated near its center. You didn't know you were protecting the core. The cube wobbled again. This wobble, Jerry had learned, meant, I'm going to pretend I knew what I was doing, but we both know I was just trying to absorb floor debris. You're a good cube, Jerry said. Gerald Jr. pulsed contentedly. "For down," Jerry said. "Want to go?" And we nearly lost the core on number 4. The dungeon lord sat down at his desk. He picked up the mug. He took a sip. He did not turn into a garden gnome this time. The mug, apparently, understood that the moment was too serious for garden gnomes. For the first time since becoming a dungeon lord, Jerry felt something he had been too busy to notice before: the weight of actual danger. His dungeon was safe because he made it safe. But safety wasn't a state, it was a process, and processes required maintenance. He opened a new spreadsheet. He titled it, Dungeon Defense, Contingency Planning. The first cell read, "What if the next one doesn't want to talk?" The rest of the afternoon was spent dealing with the engineer and the Russian. Marcus Chun had finished reinforcing the wobbly Billy and had moved on to what he called Phase 2, structural optimization. This involved installing support beams in corridors that did not need support beams, adding grab bars to walls that did not need grab bars, and building an emergency exit from the maze that was so well designed that adventurers had started using it as the main entrance because it was more convenient. "The emergency exit is not the entrance," Jerry said, standing in front of the newly installed door. "It's well lit and has a ramp," Marcus said. "People like ramps. It's supposed to be for emergencies. Every exit is an entrance if you're creative." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense. You're just not thinking creatively." Jerry looked at the emergency exit. It had a welcome mat, the replacement, since Gerald Jr. ate the first one, a sign that said, "Please use other door," and a second sign below it that said, "Unless this door is more convenient, in which case use this door." It also had a customer satisfaction survey box, which was currently empty because nobody had filled it out yet because nobody knew what to rate an emergency exit. "Remove the survey box," Jerry said. "But what about feedback?" "The feedback is that it's an emergency exit. It doesn't need feedback." "Everything needs feedback. How else do you improve?" Jerry decided this was not a battle worth fighting. He moved on to the Russian. Sergei had added a third lock to his supply closet door. He had also added a fourth lock, which was excessive because the closet only had one door and there were now more locks than available locking surfaces. The fourth lock was attached to the wall next to the door. It locked nothing. Sergei was very proud of it. "This is fifth lock," Sergei said, pointing at a padlock that was dangling from the doorknob. "Is for psychological warfare. Adventurer sees 5 locks. Adventurer thinks, there must be something very valuable in here. But no, is only mop. But the not knowing, the wondering, this is the real treasure. The real treasure is the uncertainty we created along the way." Sergei nodded solemnly. "Now you understand." Jerry did not understand, but he was learning that understanding was not always necessary when dealing with former Russian accountants who had found their calling as supply closet guardians. That evening, Jerry sat in the dungeon core chamber with Gerald Jr. pulsing gently beside him, the mug cooling in his hands, and reviewed the day's accomplishments. 3 incursions resolved. 1 to go. The dungeon had monster diversity, goblins, a gelatinous cube, and a hag. The boss fight was pending. The aesthetics were pending. And Mrs. Patterson was knitting a sweater for her grandson in Ohio, who still didn't know she was a hag. "System," Jerry said. "What is Kevin?" The system paused. Then, "Query, what is Kevin?" Response: Kevin is assigned the role of floor decoration. He observes. He has observed everything since day 1. His observation log is now 47 pages long. The system did not know this until just now. The system is slightly unnerved. Kevin has been taking notes. Apparently. For 2 weeks. Apparently. Has anyone asked him what he's writing? No. No one has spoken to Kevin since the integration event. Except for the squirrel. The squirrel speaks to Kevin. The system does not know what they discuss. Jerry looked at Gerald Jr. The cube wobbled. It made the gentle belch sound. "I should probably talk to Kevin," Jerry said. Gerald Jr. wobbled in what might have been agreement. Tomorrow, Jerry decided. He would talk to Kevin tomorrow. Tonight, he had loopholes to find. Chapter 9: The Commerce Mimic. Linda Hargrove from 7 Beta had been waiting her entire life for something to train, and she had not been picky about what that something was. She had trained dogs as a child, cats as a teenager, and a particularly stubborn parakeet in her 20s that had learned exactly 3 words: hello, goodbye, and insurance, before expiring of natural causes. When the system had assigned her the role of mimic trainer, she had accepted it with the quiet enthusiasm of someone who had finally found her true calling and was slightly embarrassed about how long it had taken. Her first mimic had spawned on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the integration event. It had arrived in her apartment, which the system had converted into a small training facility complete with obstacle courses for furniture-based life forms, as a small wooden chest with brass hinges and an attitude. She had named it Munch, not because it ate things, although it did eat things, but because Munch was the sound it made when it was thinking, a small clicking noise that was somewhere between a clock ticking and a tiny creature chewing on something it probably shouldn't be chewing on. Munch had grown. At first, it had been content to be a chest. Then it had started experimenting. A footstool, an end table, a surprisingly convincing ottoman. Linda had encouraged this exploration with a combination of positive reinforcement, good mimic, and strategic treat distribution. Here is a brass hinge for you to absorb. But the real transformation happened when Munch discovered commerce. It started with a belt buckle. An adventurer, a level 4 rogue named Slippery Pete, had been navigating the maze when he dropped a belt buckle. Munch, disguised as a decorative crate near Sector 4, had absorbed the belt buckle and then, instead of keeping it, had extruded it back onto the floor with a small label written in what appeared to be mimic slime: 1 gold. Slippery Pete, confused but intrigued, had put 1 gold coin on the crate. Munch had absorbed the coin and left the belt buckle. A transaction had occurred. By the end of the day, Munch had accumulated 7 gold coins, 3 silver pieces, a slightly used dagger, and a coupon for a free ale at a tavern that may or may not still exist in the post-integration world. He had also absorbed a goblin's left shoe, which had not been part of a transaction, but rather an unfortunate misunderstanding involving Glibble's inability to read "do not touch" signs. "This is a problem," Jerry said, standing in Linda's training facility and watching Munch arrange his wares on a piece of velvet that he had somehow acquired despite the dungeon not containing any velvet. "He's a natural entrepreneur," Linda said, beaming with the pride of a trainer whose trainee had exceeded all expectations. "Look at his pricing strategy. Dynamic. Responsive. He adjusts based on perceived customer wealth." He charged Glibble 5 gold for his own shoe back. Glibble shouldn't have left his shoe on the crate. Glibble is a goblin. Goblins leave things on crates. Then goblins should learn basic financial literacy. Jerry looked at Munch. Munch looked back. His brass hinges glinted in what might have been calculation. "Fine," Jerry said. "He can stay, but he needs a business license." "A what?" "A business license. If he's going to operate as a commercial entity within the dungeon, he needs to be registered. Section 12, subsection E of the Dungeon Commerce Guidelines. I read it this morning." Linda stared at him. "There are dungeon commerce guidelines. There are guidelines for everything. The system is very thorough." "Does the license cost anything?" 3 gold. Processing fee." Linda relayed this information to Munch. The mimic made the clicking sound, munch munch munch, for approximately 30 seconds. Then it extruded 3 gold coins from its interior, arranged them in a neat stack, and clicked 1 final time. "Deal," Linda translated. The Petrocelli dungeon had its first officially licensed business. The guild inspection was now 9 business days away. Jerry had spent the remaining time between review reading the guild accreditation handbook 4 times and identifying 12 areas where the requirements could be interpreted in ways that benefited a dungeon that was less ominous fortress of darkness and more community resource center with light atmospheric torches and a very active goblin union. The monster diversity requirement, at least 3 distinct species, was technically met: goblins, gelatinous cube, hag. But Jerry was worried about the boss fight experience requirement. Mr. Petrocelli had still not used the eternal vacuum of reckoning in combat. In fact, Mr. Petrocelli had not encountered any adventurers at all, because the maze was so effective at wearing them down before they reached his arena. "I need a trial run," Jerry said, standing in the boss arena on floor 1. A test of the boss fight experience. Mr. Petrocelli looked up from his throne of rent notices. The eternal vacuum hummed beside him. He had spent the morning polishing it, and it gleamed with the quiet menace of a household appliance that had been given too much power and not enough guidance. "A test," Petrocelli repeated. "Just a practice run, to see how the boss fight flows. Grubnak has volunteered to play the role of an adventurer. I am not fighting a goblin. I am a dungeon boss. I fight heroes. I guard treasure. I do not fight goblins." He's wearing a helmet. It's very convincing. It's a soup pot. It's a very realistic soup pot. Petrocelli stood up. The vacuum hummed louder. "Fine. Send in the goblin." Grubnak entered the boss arena. He was wearing his soup pot helmet, a cardboard breastplate that Marcus had made for him, rated for light impact only, and carrying a stick that he had designated as Sword of Goblin Justice. He was taking this very seriously. "Tremble, dungeon boss," Grubnak shouted, in what he believed was an adventurer voice. It was not. It was a goblin voice, but slightly louder. "I am here to collect your treasure and defeat you in glorious combat. Your treasure is a parking lot gold coin and some old DVDs," Grubnak added, dropping character. "I'm not actually going to take it. I'm just saying what an adventurer would say." "Stay in character," Jerry said. "Right. Sorry." Grubnak cleared his throat. "Tremble." Petrocelli raised the eternal vacuum of reckoning. The vacuum roared to life. It was not a vacuum sound. It was the sound of 1,000 lost security deposits, the accumulated rage of 37 years of property management, the deep and terrible hum of a man who had been disrespected by tenants, plumbers, and the city zoning board, and was finally being given the opportunity to do something about it. The vacuum activated. Grubnak was not sucked into the vacuum. That would have been too simple. Instead, the vacuum created a localized whirlwind of rent notices and old lease agreements, which swirled around Grubnak in a vortex of legal documentation, trapping him in a cage of his own contractual obligations. The goblin stood in the center of the vortex, holding his stick sword, looking confused. "I feel obligated," Grubnak said. "I feel like I owe someone money. I feel like I should be reading the fine print before signing anything." "That's the vacuum," Petrocelli said. "It doesn't suck souls. It sucks complacency. Anyone caught in its vortex is forced to confront their own administrative negligence." "That's terrifying," Jerry said. "It's effective. I tested it on the squirrel. The squirrel now has a filing system." The vortex subsided. Grubnak stood in the center of the arena, holding a rent notice that he had apparently signed without reading. His expression was dazed but impressed. "The boss fight is functional," Jerry said. "That's good, but we need to make it more theatrical. The guild expects a show." "I am not a performer," Petrocelli said. "I am a landlord." "Landlords are performers. Every eviction notice is a performance. Every rent increase is a dramatic monologue." Petrocelli considered this. "That's not inaccurate." "Great. We'll work on the presentation. Maybe a smoke machine. I saw one in the janitor's closet." "That is the supply closet," Sergei's voice echoed from somewhere in the distance. "For supplies. I guard supplies." The guild inspection was now 3 business days away. Munch's business had expanded. He had acquired a second velvet cloth, a small display stand made from an old bookshelf bracket, and a part-time employee, Glibble, who worked for 1 cheese cracker per hour and had learned a fourth letter, S, which Glibble believed stood for sale. Gerald Jr. had grown to 6 feet per dimension and had developed a new ability, gentle transportation. An adventurer who had gotten lost in the maze had accidentally stepped into Gerald Jr.'s gelatinous body. The cube had been blocking a corridor in what Jerry had been told was a strategic obstruction maneuver, but was actually Gerald Jr. trying to absorb a floor tile, and had emerged, unharmed, thanks to selective dissolution, on the other side of the cube, 15 feet away. The adventurer had screamed for approximately 3 minutes. Then he had asked if he could do it again. "Your cube is a transportation system now," Grubnak observed. "He's a hazard," Jerry said. "He's a ride. He's a hazard who also happens to be a ride. That's called versatility." The system pinged. "New ability detected. Gelatinous transport. Your gelatinous cube has learned to safely transport organic matter through its body. Adventurers may now use your cube as a biological conveyor system. This is unprecedented." The system is fascinated and also slightly nauseated. "How can you be nauseated?" Jerry asked the system. "You don't have a stomach." The system has metaphorical nausea. It is a new feature, added in version 47.2.2. It was not requested, but it is now active. The system is still getting used to it. Linda brought the second mimic to Jerry's attention on Thursday afternoon. It had spawned overnight in her training facility, a smaller mimic than Munch, this one taking the form of a wooden sign. It had "Hello" written on it in mimic slime. "It's a baby," Linda said, cradling the sign mimic in her arms. Munch reproduced. "I think it's asexual mimic reproduction, triggered by environmental enrichment. The brass hinges, the velvet, the commerce. It was too much for him." "The dungeon is going to be overrun with mimics," Jerry said. "They're very well behaved. They're mimics. They're commerce mimics. They don't want to eat adventurers. They want to sell them things." "What things?" "The things adventurers drop in the maze. Lost swords, broken shields, that one adventurer's left boot that we never returned. That boot has been through enough. The boot is now priced at 30 gold. Munch considers it a collector's item." Jerry looked at the baby sign mimic. It was blinking its letters, HELLO, in what appeared to be a customer service greeting. He looked at Linda, who was radiating maternal pride. He looked at Munch, who was arranging a new display of slightly used adventurer equipment and humming the clicking sound that was his version of elevator music. "Fine," Jerry said. "But they need business licenses. Both of them. 3 gold each. Family discount. 4 gold for both." Linda relayed this to Munch. The mimic clicked for exactly 11 seconds. Then it extruded 4 gold coins and a bonus brass hinge. "Deal," Linda translated. The Petrocelli dungeon now had 2 officially licensed businesses, one unlicensed, Gerald Jr.'s transportation service, which Jerry had decided to classify as public infrastructure rather than commercial enterprise for tax purposes, and a part-time goblin employee who knew 4 letters and was very proud of the 4th one. The guild inspection was coming. The dungeon was ready. Probably. Somewhere on floor 3, Kevin was writing in his observation log. The entry was short. Day 17. Munch has reproduced. The dungeon economy is evolving. Mrs. Patterson continues knitting. Sergey has added a 6th lock. Gerald Jr. is now a transportation network. Grubnak has started planning a union meeting to discuss the new commerce mimics and whether they should be allowed to join. I have observed all of this. I am still standing. I am still observing. Nobody has asked me about my log. The squirrel, sitting on Kevin's shoulder, chittered in agreement. Nobody knew what they discussed. The system was still slightly unnerved. Chapter 10. The mug that has seen too much. The mug had been unremarkable for most of its existence. It was a ceramic vessel, white, with "World's Okayest Dungeon Lord" printed on one side in a font that suggested the designer had given up halfway through. Jerry had bought it at a mall kiosk 3 years ago, on a Tuesday that had been even more mediocre than the Tuesday that ended the world. The mug had survived the integration event without incident. It sat on Jerry's desk, holding coffee, being a mug. When the system classified it as a dungeon artifact of unclear power, Jerry had assumed this was a clerical error, the system's equivalent of accidentally flagging a toaster as a weapon of mass destruction. He had been wrong. The first incident happened on a morning that was otherwise unremarkable. Jerry made coffee. He poured it into the mug. He took a sip. He gained the ability to speak Old Gnomish. For approximately 6 hours, he did not encounter any old gnomes. This was, Jerry reflected, the most useless magical ability he had ever acquired, which was saying something because he had once been granted immunity to paper cuts and had immediately paper cut himself just to feel the power. He started a spreadsheet. The mug effects log, days 1 through 7. Day 1, morning, coffee. Old Gnomish. Did not encounter old gnomes. Waste of a perfectly good buff. Day 1, afternoon, tea. Invisible from the waist down. Walked around the dungeon for an hour before realizing nobody could see his legs. Grubnack asked if this was a new goblin fashion trend. Jerry said it was not. Day 2, morning, water. Immunity to paper cuts. Jerry spent the afternoon shuffling papers aggressively. Gerald Jr. was confused but supportive. Day 2, evening, orange juice. Voice became extremely deep. Sounded like a movie trailer narrator. Mrs. Patterson asked him to stop narrating her knitting. In a world where one woman knits forever, one scarf will change everything. Mrs. Patterson was not amused. Day 3, milk. Nothing happened. This was the most unsettling outcome. The system provided a note. Effect may be delayed, or may not occur. The mug is unpredictable. The system is no longer trying to understand it. Day 4, soda. Briefly became a pacifist. This was redundant, as Jerry was already a pacifist. The effect lasted 2 hours and accomplished nothing except making him feel mildly self-righteous while reorganizing his spreadsheet. Day 5, coffee. Gained the ability to understand Gerald Jr.'s thoughts. Gerald Jr.'s thoughts were, cracker, cracker, wobble, cracker. Where's Jerry? Cracker. Dust bunny. Not cracker. Disappointed. Wobble. Cracker. The cube's inner life was not complex, but it was honest. Day 6. Accidentally spilled coffee on the floor. The coffee soaked into the stone. A flower grew. The flower sang. In Aramaic. Nobody knew why. The flower was still in the dungeon core chamber. It sang sometimes. Jerry had started humming along. Day 7. Water. Nothing happened. Or so Jerry thought. 3 hours later, he realized he could taste colors. Blue was salty. Red was crunchy. Green tasted like Tuesday. He did not add this to the spreadsheet because he was not sure how to describe it in a way that would not make him sound insane. Incursion number 5 arrived on the 8th day of mug testing. His name, according to the system overlay, was Professor Alastair Quibble, Ph.D., Doctor of Theology, ESQ, and he was not here to fight the dungeon. He was here to study the mug. He was a level 11 research wizard specializing in artifact identification and classification, which was apparently a legitimate adventuring discipline. He had been commissioned to study the mug by a client he referred to only as my benefactor, someone who had taken a very specific interest in the Petrocelli dungeon's operations. The benefactor's instructions were detailed: catalog every artifact, assess every denizen's combat potential, estimate the dungeon's monthly mana throughput. Everything that exists has a pattern, Professor Quibble said, setting up his equipment in the dungeon core chamber. His equipment consisted of a magnifying glass, a tuning fork, a small jar of glowing powder, and a very complicated-looking device that appeared to be a toaster with extra dials. Artifacts of unclear power are not actually unclear. They are merely unstudied. I've been studying it for 8 days, Jerry said. Yesterday, it made me taste colors. Blue was salty. Fascinating. What was green? Tuesday. Professor Quibble wrote this down. He wrote it down very seriously, in a notebook that already contained extensive observations about the dungeon's other anomalies. He had interviewed Mrs. Patterson, psychological warfare through conversational Socratic method, brilliant, tested Gerald Jr.'s selective dissolution, biological impossibility made possible through what I can only describe as sheer cheerful determination, and spent an hour in the supply closet with Sergei, not sure what he's guarding, but I am now afraid of mops. I would like to conduct a controlled experiment, Quibble said. I will drink from the mug. I will document the effects. And then I will publish my findings in the Journal of Applied Magical Artifact Studies. You have a journal? We have 3. The journal, the quarterly review, and the holiday special issue. Jerry looked at the mug. The mug sat on his desk, innocent and ceramic and radiating the energy of something that had seen the birth and death of stars and had chosen not to comment. Fine, Jerry said, but sign the waiver first. Professor Quibble signed the waiver. He initialed next to the fireball clause. He initialed next to the lost limbs clause. He initialed next to the existential dread clause. He added a 4th clause of his own. I accept all consequences, including but not limited to spontaneous transmogrification, temporary species reassignment, and the sudden acquisition of knowledge man was not meant to know. He initialed that too. He was very thorough. He drank from the mug. For approximately 6 seconds, nothing happened. Then Professor Quibble's eyes went very wide, then very narrow. Then one eye went wide and the other went narrow, which was physically impossible, but the mug did not care about physics. I understand taxation, Quibble whispered. I understand it completely. Deductions, depreciation schedules, capital gains, the quiet satisfaction of filing a complete and accurate return. I need to organize my receipts. He stood up. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. I am still a wizard, he said, his voice strained. But I am also now a certified public accountant. Both things are true simultaneously. My brain is trying to process this and failing. He walked out of the dungeon in a state of profound professional confusion. He left behind his notebook, his tuning fork, and his toaster device, which was now displaying a stock ticker for reasons nobody could explain. Later that evening, Jerry flipped through the notebook. It was meticulous, detailed. Section 3 covered denizen combat readiness, a thorough analysis of the goblins, rating, low individually, surprisingly high when motivated by cheese crackers. Gerald Jr., rating, could dissolve an entire platoon, has chosen not to. And Mrs. Patterson, rating, do not engage under any circumstances. The T is a trap. Section 7 covered Dungeon Lord Strategic Assessment, rating, extremely dangerous, not through combat, but through what I can only describe as weaponized reasonableness. Tucked into the back cover was a business card. It was unremarkable. Matte black. A single line of text in silver. The accounting, auditing, and strategic consultation. No address. No phone number. But on the back, handwritten in Quibble's careful script, benefactor says hello. Says he'll be in touch. Says he likes your union contract. Jerry stared at the card for a long time. Someone was watching his dungeon. Someone with the resources to hire a level 11 research wizard as a scout. Someone who liked his union contract. He filed the card under Concerns, Pending. The system pinged. Incident log. Adventurer incursion number 5 status. Resolved. Nonviolent outcome assessment. Adventurer departed after acquisition of dual professional certifications. Reward. Plus 200 experience points. Bonus. Plus 25 denizen morale. The goblins found the tax collector transformation hilarious. Notes. Professor Quibble has since opened a tax preparation service. He is very successful. He has also published a paper titled The Mug, a preliminary analysis. The Journal of Applied Magical Artifact Studies has accepted it for publication. 5 incursions resolved, Jerry said. Trial period requirement met for incursions. Now I just need to expand the dungeon by 1 floor. The inspection is in 2 business days, Grubnack said. I know. The Guild Academy standards require a boss fight experience. I know. We don't have a fourth floor boss. I know. Grubnak waited. Jerry looked at the mug. The mug sat on his desk, holding the dregs of his morning coffee, radiating the energy of something that was waiting for the right moment to be funny again. We'll hold auditions, Jerry said. For what? For the fourth floor boss. What? The dungeon needs a boss. We have goblins. We have a hag. We have a landlord. We have a Russian with a supply closet. One of them can be the boss. You want goblins to audition for a boss position. I want everyone to audition, including Kevin. Grubnak stared at him. Kevin hasn't spoken since the integration event. Kevin has been taking notes for 2.5 weeks. He's probably the most informed person in the dungeon. He deserves a shot. Later that evening, Jerry gathered the core dungeon denizens in the boss arena for what he called an informal discussion about potential career advancement opportunities and what Grubnak called the weirdest union meeting we've ever had. He explained the situation. The trial period required a territory expansion. The inspection required a boss fight. The dungeon needed a fourth floor, and the fourth floor needed a boss, and the boss needed to be someone who could provide a memorable encounter experience, as defined by Guild Standard 7C, subsection 3. The job comes with benefits, Jerry said. Title, office, dental. Goblins already have dental, Grubnak said. More dental. How can there be more dental? I don't know, but I'll find a way. The auditions were scheduled for Friday. The guild inspection was in 2 days. The dungeon was about to hold its first ever job interview for the position of boss of Floor 4. The intimidator, the threat, the reason adventurers scream. Mrs. Patterson continued knitting. The knot dragon on her shoulder blinked slowly. Kevin stood in the corner, perfectly still, observing everything. His observation log now had a new entry, day 19. Boss audition scheduled. The dungeon lord thinks I deserve a shot. Nobody has ever thought I deserved a shot before. I'm not sure how to feel about this. I will continue observing. The squirrel, perched on Kevin's shoulder, chittered. Kevin did not respond in any visible way. But the squirrel knew. The squirrel always knew. Chapter 11: The Enemy at the Threshold. The mid-integration progress review arrived on a Wednesday morning, and for approximately 5 minutes, 27 of the most dangerous beings on the planet were all reading the same email. Jerry read his summary. He read it again. He made coffee in the mug. Effect: temporary ability to smell the color purple. Purple smelled like ozone and old books, and read it a third time. Performance summary: mid-integration review dungeon seed. Gerald Fitch violence output. Bottom 4%. Rank: 26 of 27. Territorial expansion. Bottom 48%. Rank: 14 of 27. Denizen satisfaction. Top 1%. Rank: 1 of 27. Adventurer fatality rate. 0%. Rank: 27 of 27. Administrative compliance. Top 1%. Rank: 1 of 27. Overall ranking. 19 of 27. System commentary. The Petrocelli dungeon is an anomaly. It should not work. It does work. We have stopped trying to understand why. We now simply watch. With concern. We're first in denizen satisfaction, Grubnak said, reading over Jerry's shoulder. We're last in violence, Jerry said. The system considers this a problem. Is it a problem? Not for us, but apparently for everyone else. He was right. The rankings triggered responses almost immediately, but not the kind Jerry expected. Incursion number 6 arrived via system notification at noon, and it was unlike any incursion the dungeon had faced before. Alert: incoming visitor, classification, diplomatic envoy origin, dungeon seed Caliph the Ashbringer entity type, fire IMP, juvenile, designation, sender message from sender. A gesture of professional courtesy. Consider it a housewarming gift. K. A housewarming gift, Jerry said. She sent me a fire imp. The imp was small, about the size of a toaster, which was fitting because it had immediately tried to ignite the toaster device Professor Quibble had left behind. It was made of flame and shadow, with eyes that flickered between orange and black, and it spoke in a voice that sounded like the crackling of a very small, very angry campfire. "I am Cinder," it announced, hovering in the entrance chamber. "Emissary of the Ashbringer. I bring greetings from the Obsidian Throne. Also, I am required to inform you that this is a diplomatic mission and any harm done to me constitutes an act of war per Section 14, subsection A of the Dungeon Seed Compact." "The non-aggression clause," Jerry said. "Yes, I am very protected, legally." Grubnak, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "Protected how? Like diplomatic immunity." "Exactly like diplomatic immunity." "So you can do anything, and we can't stop you?" "That is the general principle, yes." Grubnak's ears twitched. Jerry recognized that twitch. It was the twitch Grubnak made when he had identified a loophole. "Interesting," Grubnak said. "Very interesting. Tell me, Imp, what are your working conditions like with the Ashbringer?" Cinder's flames flickered. "My working conditions?" "Yes. Hours. Pay. Benefits." "I am a fire imp. I do not have benefits. I burn things. Unpaid. For eternity." "Do you get breaks?" "I am made of fire. Fire does not take breaks." "Do you want breaks?" Cinder's flames flickered again, a different flicker this time, slower, more uncertain. "I have never been asked that question before." Grubnak smiled. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a union steward who had identified a new membership opportunity. By the end of the afternoon, Cinder had filed a formal grievance against Caliph the Ashbringer. The complaint listed 17 workplace violations, including, but not limited to, unpaid overtime, hazardous working conditions. "I am literally on fire all the time. Nobody asked if I'm okay with that. Lack of dental. Do fire imps even have teeth? I don't know, but I want the option. And emotional neglect. The Ashbringer refers to all her imps as you. The small one. We have names." Grubnak had submitted the grievance through the system's inter-dungeon communication channel, which was apparently a real thing that nobody had ever used for labor disputes before. The system had processed it, reluctantly, and forwarded it to Caliph with a form note. "Please respond within 30 business days or the grievance will be escalated to the Dungeon Labor Relations Board, currently non-existent, but the system can create one if necessary." Caliph's response arrived 17 seconds later. It was not a formal reply. It was a single line of text, delivered in the Ashbringer's characteristic style. "I sent you a spy, and you unionized it. What is wrong with you?" Jerry read the message. He read it again. "She sent us a spy," he said. "She sent us a spy," Grubnak confirmed. "The imp was gathering intelligence. We accidentally turned it into a labor activist." "Is the imp still gathering intelligence?" "Yes, but now it's also demanding a 401k. Cinder, who was now hovering in the Goblin break room with a union membership card, hand-drawn by Glibble, who had learned a 6th letter, U, for union, specifically for this purpose, crackled contentedly. "I have never had representation before," the imp said. "I did not know I could have representation. This changes everything." "Does it change your loyalty to the Ashbringer?" "Loyalty is complicated. Representation is paperwork. I prefer paperwork." The accountant's message arrived that evening, delivered not through the system, but through an actual courier, a bewildered man in a suit who had apparently been hired through a temp agency and had no idea what he was delivering or why. The envelope was unremarkable. The contents were not. "Mr. Fitch, my research wizard has filed his report. I have read it with great interest. His analysis of your dungeon's mana throughput was particularly enlightening. You are operating at 40% efficiency. This is understandable. You are new to dungeon management. You are learning. I am writing to inform you of a development that may affect your expansion plans. As of this morning, I have acquired the deeds to the strip mall to the north, the parking structure to the east, and the abandoned warehouse to the west. The municipal lot to the south, I acquired that 3 days before the planetary integration event, before the dungeon existed, before there was anything to surround. I am not sure why I did it. I felt it was the right decision at the time. I have since concluded that it was. Your dungeon is now surrounded by territory I control. This is not a threat. It is a notification. Regarding my franchise proposal, I have opened 6 locations. They are very popular. The logo tests well. I have attached the latest focus group data, Appendix A. I understand you have not formally approved the franchise agreement. I have proceeded without formal approval. I believe this is what entrepreneurs call moving fast and breaking things. I prefer moving efficiently and acquiring things. I look forward to our continued association. The Accountant. P.S. Professor Quibble has recovered from his tax collector episode. He is now running my franchise division. He sends his regards. He also sends a 1099 form for the gold he spent on your left boot. He is very thorough. Jerry read the letter. He read it again. He handed it to Grubnak, who read it with increasing alarm. We're surrounded, Grubnak said. Surrounded is a strong word. They bought the strip mall, the parking structure, the municipal lot, the warehouse. The municipal lot was 3 days before the integration event. Jerry's voice was quiet. The rest were this morning. That one was before. Grubnak's ears went flat. Before the dungeon existed. Before any dungeons existed. Before anyone knew what was coming. They looked at each other. Jerry didn't say what they were both thinking, that the accountant hadn't reacted to the dungeon. The accountant had anticipated it. And that was the difference between eccentric businessman and whatever the accountant actually was. They're investments, Jerry said, but the word felt wrong now. They're a perimeter. The accountant has built a wall around us using property deeds. Jerry looked at his dungeon map. The Petrocelli Arms was a small square in the center of a much larger territory, now marked with accountant-owned designations. Expansion, the kind of expansion a dungeon lord was supposed to pursue, would require negotiating with someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to move forward without permission. He hasn't attacked us, Jerry said. He's just made it impossible for us to grow without him. That's worse than attacking. Attacking is honest. This is enclosure. The third message of the day came from Forlag Karn, and it was the one that troubled Jerry the most. Forlag had been running simulations. His spreadsheets, which Jerry had corrected twice now, had been expanded into a full forecasting model. The model tracked every loophole Jerry had exploited, every system patch that had been released in response, and the rate at which the system was learning to anticipate Jerry's methods. The projection was stark. Mr. Fitch, Forlag's message read, I have been studying the system's adaptation patterns. It is learning. Not quickly. It is a 40,000-year-old bureaucracy, and bureaucracies learn slowly. But it is learning. Each loophole you exploit is patched within 6 to 8 business days. Each patch closes multiple pathways you haven't discovered yet. At the current rate, I project that within 4 to 6 months, the system will have closed approximately 80% of the exploitable gaps in the terms and conditions. Within 12 months, it will have closed 97%. Your strategy, reading the fine print, finding the gaps, exploiting the contradictions, has a shelf life. The system was not designed to deal with someone like you. It is redesigning itself. I am telling you this not as a threat, but as a professional courtesy. You corrected my math. I am returning the favor. Prepare accordingly. Forlag Karn. Jerry stared at the projection. 4 to 6 months until his primary advantage was eroded. A year until it was nearly gone. He had built his entire dungeon philosophy on the idea that the fine print would always be there for him. But the fine print was being rewritten. And the worst part was that Forlag was right. Jerry could see it in the patch notes. Each update was sharper, more comprehensive, closing not just the specific loopholes he had used, but the categories of loopholes he might try next. That night, Jerry sat in the dungeon core chamber with Gerald Jr. pulsing gently beside him and reviewed the day's developments. Caliph was furious about her unionized spy, but couldn't act because of the non-aggression clause, which expired in 63 days. The accountant had surrounded him with territory that made expansion a negotiation, not a decision. The system was slowly closing every loophole he had ever found. And Forlag's projection hung over everything like a countdown clock. "We have a problem," Jerry said. The cube wobbled. "3 problems, actually. The Ashbringer wants to destroy us. The accountant wants to own us. And the system is learning how to stop us." The cube wobbled again. "The good news is that they all want different things. Caliph wants destruction. The accountant wants acquisition. The system wants compliance." The cube wobbled a third time, this one meaning, "I understand cheese crackers better than I understand geopolitics, but I support you." Jerry looked at his contingency planning spreadsheet, the one he had started after Sir Galahad nearly reached the core. He had added several new columns today: external threats, accountant countermeasures, and system adaptation workarounds. The cells were mostly empty. He was still figuring out what went in them. But he was figuring. That was what he did. That was what he had always done. "System," he said, "can I file a counter grievance against another dungeon seed for attempting to undermine my dungeon through espionage?" The system paused. Then, "Query, counter grievance eligibility. Response, Section 14, Subsection C allows dungeon seeds to file grievances against other dungeon seeds for actions deemed hostile or adversarial in nature that do not constitute direct physical conflict. Espionage qualifies. Filing fee, 50 mana. Processing time, 4 to 6 weeks. Note: the system notes that you are filing a grievance against the number 1 ranked dungeon seed on the planet. The Ashbringer has an exceptional violence output score. You have a 0. The system cannot prevent you from filing this grievance. The system is, nevertheless, watching with what can only be described as horrified fascination." "File it," Jerry said. The grievance was submitted. Somewhere in the vast machinery of the system, an automated process that had been dormant for 40,000 years stirred to life and began processing a labor dispute between the happiest goblin union in history and the most terrifying dungeon lord on the continent. And somewhere in the mountains of Central Asia, Caliph the Ashbringer received a notification about a counter grievance filed by dungeon seed Gerald Fitch. The notification was very polite. It was also very official. It included a deadline for response and a warning about non-compliance penalties. Caliph stared at the notification for a long time. Then she did something she had not done in years. She laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just realized their enemy was far more interesting than they had expected. "This is going to be more fun than I thought," she said to the empty temple. And then, because she was the Ashbringer and because she understood strategy, she began preparing a response that was not a direct attack, but something far more dangerous. A formal inquiry into the Petrocelli Dungeon's compliance with Section 15 of the Dungeon Seed Compact, which governed minimum conflict participation standards. If Jerry could file grievances, she could file compliance reviews. If he could weaponize paperwork, so could she. The paperwork war had begun. Kevin's observation log that night was 6 pages long. The final entry read: Day 20. 3 threats. The Ashbringer, destruction, 63-day timer. The accountant, acquisition, perimeter established. The system, adaptation, 4 to 6-month viability window. The dungeon lord has filed a counter grievance. He is also requesting a meeting with the entire dungeon staff tomorrow to discuss strategic restructuring. I believe this is what management consultants call pivoting. I am not a management consultant. I am a man who stands still and takes notes. But I have observed enough to know that when the dungeon lord starts contingency planning, things are about to get interesting. And yet, the goblins now have an imp in their union. The commerce mimics are thriving. The cube is up to 8 feet. Mrs. Patterson's grandson in Ohio has been told about her hag status and responded with cool, Grandma. Sergey has added an 8th lock. The eternal Petrocelli is designing passport templates. We are surrounded. We are outmatched. We are on a clock. But we are not alone. And the dungeon lord has never been wrong about the fine print. The squirrel, perched on Kevin's shoulder, chittered. Kevin closed his log. He looked at the Allen key on his desk, the artifact that could complete any unfinished system. Then he looked at the Birkvik, its shelves glowing with the quiet light of a puzzle that was still being solved. Tomorrow, he said, we pivot. The bookshelf did not respond. It was a bookshelf, but the instruction booklet, embedded in its center shelf, pulsed once, a single amber beat, as if in acknowledgement. Chapter 12: The Birkvik Boss Room, Auditions. The 4th floor had been expanding itself for days. Jerry had noticed it first as a faint humming in the walls, a vibration that felt like the dungeon was clearing its throat and trying to decide what to say. By Thursday morning, the day of the guild inspection, the commotion had progressed to full-blown territorial growth, consuming the empty storage rooms on the eastern side of the building and transforming them into something that was not quite a floor and not quite a void and not quite anything Jerry had seen before. At the center of it was the Birkvik. The bookshelf had been dormant since the integration event, lurking in the shadows of the dungeon core chamber like a piece of furniture that was waiting for the right moment to become important again. It had grown. Its shelves had multiplied. Its surface was now covered in symbols that glowed with a faint amber light, the same amber light that had pulsed from the system node on that first Tuesday. The instruction booklet, which had flown into the darkness during the transformation, had returned. It was now embedded in the bookshelf's center shelf, glowing like a sacred text. The bookshelf is a boss room, Jerry said. It has always been a boss room, Grubnak said. You just didn't notice because you were busy unionizing us. The instructions are in a language that predates human civilization. That seems like a design flaw. It's not a flaw if you assume the users were architects. Were the architects goblins? No. Then it's a flaw. Jerry approached the Birkvik. The symbols on its surface shifted as he drew near, rearranging themselves into patterns that were almost readable, but not quite. It was like looking at a word you knew in a language you didn't, the meaning hovering just beyond comprehension. There's a puzzle here, Jerry said. The puzzle is the boss fight. The bookshelf doesn't attack. It confuses. It presents problems that seem solvable but aren't. It traps the mind in loops of frustration and despair. So it's a mental boss. It's a furniture assembly boss, which is worse. The auditions for the floor 4 boss position were held in the Birkvik chamber because Jerry had decided that whoever became the boss would need to work in harmony with the bookshelf, and also because the chamber was the only room in the dungeon large enough to hold an audience of goblins, a gelatinous cube, a hag, an engineer, a Russian, and Kevin, all of whom had shown up to audition or support the auditioners or simply to see what happened when a gelatinous cube tried to be intimidating. First to audition, Grubnak. I am Grubnak, he announced, standing on a crate that Marcus had provided for height enhancement purposes. Steward of the Goblin Union, wielder of the Stick of Justice. You will tremble before my collectively bargained authority. He swung the stick. It made a whooshing sound. It was not an intimidating whooshing sound. It was the whooshing sound a stick makes when it's been swung by a goblin who is 3 feet tall and wearing a soup pot. Good energy, Jerry said, but the stick is not very threatening. It is the Stick of Justice. It's a stick. Justice is in the eye of the stick holder. Fair point. Next. Second, Gerald Jr. The gelatinous cube wobbled into the center of the chamber. It had grown to nearly 7 feet per dimension and had developed a new internal swirl pattern, amber and gold and faint traces of purple, that pulsed with what Jerry had learned was the cube equivalent of excitement. Gerald Jr. attempted to be threatening. He expanded to his full size. He made the belch sound, but louder. He extruded all 4 of his pseudopods simultaneously in what was clearly intended to be a display of terrifying multiplicity. Mrs. Patterson began knitting faster. "That's a very enthusiastic cube," she said. "But I'm not scared." "Me neither," said Sergey, who was sitting on a folding chair he had brought from his supply closet. "Is cute. Hard to be scared of cute." Gerald Jr. wobbled sadly. "You're hired as transportation," Jerry said. "Not as a boss. You're very good at transportation." The cube wobbled happily and returned to the corner, where it began trying to absorb a loose floor tile. Third, Sergei Volkov. Sergei stood in the center of the chamber. He had brought his mop. He held it like a weapon. He looked at the assembled audience with the steely gaze of a man who had spent 20 years as an accountant and had emerged from the experience with very specific opinions about inventory management. "This is mop," he said. "You know what mop does? Mop cleans. Mop removes dirt. You are dirt. I am mop. You understand?" The goblins nodded. They did not understand, but they were impressed. "The boss fight," Sergei continued, "is you try to take supplies from supply closet. I am there. I say no. You try anyway. We fight. You lose. Because I have mop. And conviction. Mostly conviction. But also mop." "What supplies?" Jerry asked. "It does not matter what supplies. The supplies are symbolic. The supplies represent order. The supplies represent the thin line between civilization and chaos. You take supplies, you cross line. I do not let you cross line." That's very philosophical. Accounting is philosophical. You count things. You ask, what is value? What is asset? What is liability? These are philosophical questions. Sergei paused. "Also, I have mop." Jerry noted Sergei as a strong candidate. "Thank you, Sergei. Next." Fourth, Kevin. Everyone turned to look at Kevin. Kevin had been standing in the corner of the Book1 chamber for the entire audition process, perfectly still, observing. Nobody had seen him arrive. Nobody had seen him move. He was simply there, as he had always been there, as he would always be there. "Kevin," Jerry said, "would you like to audition?" Kevin did not move. He did not speak. He stood, perfectly, still. Then, very slowly, he took a single step forward. The goblins gasped. Gerald Jr. wobbled in surprise. Mrs. Patterson's knitting needles stopped clicking. Sergei's grip on his mop tightened. "I observe," Kevin said. His voice was soft. It was not a voice that had been used much. It was the voice of someone who had been listening for 2.5 weeks and was only now deciding to speak. "I have observed everything," Kevin said. "Since day one. I know every adventurer who has entered. I know every conversation that has happened in these corridors. I know where the goblins hide their emergency cheese cracker stash. I know that Sergei talks to his mop when he thinks nobody is listening. I know that Mrs. Patterson's dragon is named Percival and that he prefers tuna to chicken. I know that Grubnak is afraid of heights because of an incident with a tall bookshelf when he was a young goblin. I know that the dungeon lord drinks from the mug, even though he knows it might turn him into a garden gnome." He took another step forward. The chamber was silent. "I am not strong. I am not fast. I am not impressive. But I know things. And in this dungeon," he paused, "knowledge is the most dangerous weapon there is." The silence stretched. Grubnak's soup pot helmet slipped slightly. Gerald Jr. forgot to absorb the floor tile. Mrs. Patterson's dragon, Percival, blinked slowly. "You're hired," Jerry said. "Good," said Kevin. "I have a list of improvements for the boss chamber, starting with better lighting." The green torches hurt Mrs. Patterson's eyes. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "He pays attention," she said. "I like him." The Book1 chose that moment to activate. The instruction booklet, which had been glowing faintly on the center shelf, blazed with sudden light. The symbols on the bookshelf's surface began to move, sliding, rotating, rearranging themselves into patterns that were finally readable. The language was not English. It was not any human language. But Jerry could read it anyway, because the same system that had rewritten his apartment had apparently also rewritten his brain's language processing, and the symbols resolved into words that he understood. Assembly complete. Boss chamber unlocked. The Allen key is waiting. A compartment slid open in the Book1 space. Inside was a single object, a small, silver Allen key, gleaming with amber light. Jerry picked it up. It was warm. It hummed. The system pinged. Item acquired. The Allen key of completion, legendary. A key that was always missing. A key that was always waiting. This artifact can complete any unfinished system, resolve any pending process, and finalize any incomplete form. Effect. Once per day, use the key to instantly complete one bureaucratic action, bypassing normal processing times. Warning. The system does not approve of this item. The system cannot prevent its use. The system is filing a formal objection. The objection will take 6 to 8 weeks to process. By then, you will have used the key 42 times. The system is aware of this. The system is not happy. Jerry looked at the key. He looked at the Book1. He looked at Kevin, who was already making notes about the lighting situation. The dungeon now has 4 floors, Jerry said, and a boss for the 4th floor, and a legendary Allen key. The trial period requirements are met, Grubnack said. 6 incursions. Territory expansion pending assembly. Positive denizen morale. And a counter grievance against the Ashbringer that may or may not be legally valid. The inspection is today. I know. We're going to pass. How do you know? Jerry held up the Allen key. Because I have this. And because he looked around the chamber, at the goblins, at the hag, at the Russian, at the cube, at the man who had stood in silence for 2.5 weeks and was now the most qualified boss in dungeon history. Because this dungeon was never built to kill people. It was built to give people what they actually need. And that, I think, is worth more than any guild standard. The guild inspection would arrive in 2 hours. The adventure was not over. But it was, in its own weird, wonderful way, just getting good. Chapter 13, The Bureaucratic Sovereignty Incident. Inspector Thaddeus Hornsworthy of the Adventurers Guild Dungeon Standards Committee had inspected 147 dungeons in his 12-year career. He had seen spike pits filled with acid. He had seen boss fights that lasted 6 hours and required 3 healing potions and a priest. He had seen a gelatinous cube the size of a small house dissolve an entire adventuring party in under 30 seconds. He had been unimpressed by all of it. But he had never seen a dungeon with a welcome desk. "Sign in, please," said the man behind the desk, who was wearing a faded t-shirt that said, "I fix printers," and drinking coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Dungeon Lord." Hornsworthy did not sign in. He did not believe in signing in. Signing in was for post offices and dental appointments, not for places where people were supposed to die horribly. "I am Inspector Hornsworthy," he said. "I am here to evaluate this dungeon's compliance with the minimum dungeon quality standards." "Of course," Jerry said. "I've been expecting you. I've prepared a briefing packet." He handed Hornsworthy a folder. It was organized. It had tabs. The tabs were labeled Monster Diversity, Boss Fight Experience, Loot Quality, Aesthetic Compliance, Adventurer Satisfaction Surveys, and Miscellaneous, pending. The folder was also laminated. Hornsworthy did not know how to process a laminated inspection packet. "You laminated it," Hornsworthy said. "The goblins have a juice box problem. Lamination prevents juice box incidents." The inspection took 5 hours. Hornsworthy examined every floor. He counted the monster species, goblins, gelatinous cube, hag, 3, which met the minimum. He observed the boss fight arena, floor 1. Mr. Petroselli demonstrated the eternal vacuum of reckoning by creating a localized vortex of lease agreements. Hornsworthy refused to admit he was impressed. He evaluated the loot quality, Munch's Commerce Station was selling slightly used adventurer equipment at competitive prices. Hornsworthy bought a left boot for 4 gold and did not explain why. He met Kevin. "Are you the floor 4 boss?" Hornsworthy asked. "I observe," Kevin said. "What do you observe?" "Everything, including the fact that you bought a left boot, even though you don't have a right boot to match. You were hoping to find the right boot here. You won't. The right boot was eaten by a gelatinous cube on day 4. I saw it happen." Hornsworthy wrote this down. He did not know why. He felt compelled to document it. He met Mrs. Patterson. "Are you a hag?" Hornsworthy asked. "I am the hag," Mrs. Patterson said. "There is a difference. Tea." Hornsworthy accepted the tea. It was excellent. He did not know why a hag would make excellent tea. He decided not to ask. He met Sergey. "What are you guarding?" "Supplies." "What kind of supplies?" "Not telling. If I tell, you know. If you know, supplies are compromised. Supplies must not be compromised." "There are 6 locks on this door." 7. I added one during this conversation. Hornsworthy looked at the door. There were indeed 7 locks now. He had not seen Sergey add the 7th lock. This was, he decided, the most unsettling thing he had encountered in any dungeon, including the acid pit and the house-sized cube. The inspection concluded in the dungeon core chamber. Hornsworthy sat in a chair that Marcus had provided, rated for up to 250 pounds, with a safety rail and an emergency release lever. He reviewed his notes. 17 minor violations. Improper torch spacing. A door that opened inward instead of outward. A fire extinguisher that was technically not rated for magical fires. But no major violations. No safety hazards that weren't also equipped with safety rails. No boss fights that didn't provide adequate warning signage. No monster encounters that didn't come with a waiver. "I cannot fail this dungeon," Hornsworthy said. He sounded surprised to be saying it. "You've violated no major standards," he continued. "Your monster diversity is adequate. Your boss fights are unconventional but effective. Your aesthetics are unusual but not non-compliant. And your adventurer satisfaction surveys." He paused. "You have adventurer satisfaction surveys?" "Marcus added them," Jerry said. "He believes everything needs feedback." "Your average rating is 4.7 out of 5. The continental average is 2.3 out of 5. 2.3 is considered acceptable. You have a 4.7. The goblins use positive reinforcement. The goblins hand adventurers protein bars on their way out. And coupons. And in one case, a hand-knitted scarf." Hornsworthy closed his notebook. "I am going to recommend this dungeon for full accreditation. The guild will be unhappy. They sent me here to fail you. They believe your dungeon undermines the traditional dungeon economy by proving that dungeons don't have to kill people." "Do they have to kill people?" "No, but it's easier. And the guild likes easy." Jerry nodded. He understood. He had worked for a mid-sized insurance company. He knew how institutions felt about easy. The clerical error was discovered 3 days later. It had been hiding in Form 12B of the dungeon registration paperwork, the form that classified the dungeon's legal status. The form had been filled out by a guild clerical worker who had been working for 36 hours straight and had accidentally cross-referenced the dungeon's location with the wrong set of geographical coordinates, which had triggered an automatic reclassification of the Petrocelli Arms as sovereign territory, independent nation-state. Nobody had noticed. For 3 days, the Petrocelli dungeon had been, technically, a country. Then the guild's legal department noticed. Then the guild's tax department noticed. Then the guild's border control department noticed. And then, because bureaucracies are not known for their interdepartmental communication, all 3 departments came to different conclusions about what the error meant. From Adventurers Guild Legal Department to Dungeon Seed, Gerald Fitch Subject, Territorial Reclassification Notification. Due to a clerical error in Form 12B, Your dungeon has been reclassified as a sovereign nation-state entity. This reclassification grants you the following rights. 1. Diplomatic immunity within all guild-affiliated territories. 2. Exemption from municipal property tax. 3. The right to design and display a national flag. 4. The authority to issue visas to visiting adventurers. We are working to correct this error. Please allow 6 to 8 weeks. From Adventurers Guild Tax Department 2. Sovereign Entity, Petrocelli Territory Subject, Tax Assessment Notice. Congratulations on your sovereignty. As an independent nation, you are now subject to international trade tariffs on all dungeon-generated revenue, including, but not limited to, loot sales, adventurer entry fees, and commerce mimic transactions. Please remit payment within 30 days or face penalties. From Adventurers Guild Border Control 2. Sovereign Entity, Petrocelli Territory Subject, Border Crossing Protocol. As an independent nation, all adventurers entering your territory must now present a valid visa. Visa applications are processed by the Guild's Immigration Division, 6 to 8 week processing time. We recommend constructing a border checkpoint immediately. Jerry received all 3 notices within the same hour. He read them in order. He read them again. He called an emergency meeting of the dungeon's core staff, Goblins, Hag, Engineer, Russian, Cube, and Kevin, in the Berkvik chamber. We're a country, he said. Is temporary country, Sergei said. Error will be corrected. The legal department said 6 to 8 weeks. The tax department wants money now. The border control wants a checkpoint. And the tax department and the legal department are sending contradictory instructions. The legal department says we're tax exempt. The tax department says we owe tariffs. They haven't realized they're contradicting each other because the guild's departments don't talk to each other. Jerry paused, which means we can play them against each other. Play how? Grubnak asked. Simple. We tell the tax department that the legal department has granted us tax-exempt status and ask them to resolve the discrepancy internally. We tell the legal department that the border control is requiring visas and ask them to clarify the visa-granting authority. We tell the border control that the tax department is demanding tariffs and ask them to coordinate with trade enforcement. Then we do nothing and let them argue with each other for 6 to 8 weeks while we operate as a sovereign nation. That's diabolical, Mrs. Patterson said, looking up from her knitting. It's bureaucratical. There's a difference. There isn't a difference. That's the point. Mr. Petrocelli designed the flag himself. It featured the eternal vacuum of reckoning on a field of rent notice beige, with 7 stars representing the 7 locks on Sergei's supply closet and a silhouette of a gelatinous cube that looked more like a melted marshmallow than a dungeon monster, but was emotionally accurate. He presented it to Jerry with the solemnity of a man who had finally found a creative outlet for his 37 years of accumulated frustration. The flag, Petrocelli said, of the Petrocelli sovereign territory. It's a vacuum cleaner on a beige background. It's a statement on a beige background. He opened an embassy in Sergei's supply closet, which Sergei did not approve of, but could not prevent because embassy has diplomatic immunity, cannot guard against diplomacy. He appointed himself Grand Warden and Chief Ambassador. He printed business cards. The business card said, "The Eternal Petrocelli Grand Warden of the Petrocelli Sovereign Territory, first floor boss landlord diplomat, rent is still due on the 1st. He was the happiest he had been since 2019. Incursion number 7, the Guild's response, arrived on a Monday afternoon. It was not a standard adventuring party. It was the Compliance Enforcement Division, 50 heavily armed Guild enforcers led by Commander Harriet Vex, a level 14 warrior who had been sent to do what Inspector Hornsworthy could not, shut the Petrocelli dungeon down by any means necessary. They arrived at the entrance. They saw the flag. They saw the border checkpoint that Marcus had constructed overnight. It was a folding table with a sign that said, Petrocelli Sovereign Territory. All visitors must present visa and a second sign that said, "Visa applications available here. 6 to 8 week processing time." They saw Kevin standing beside the checkpoint, perfectly still, observing. "Move aside," Commander Vex said. "I have a guild enforcement order." "Do you have a visa?" Kevin asked. "I don't need a visa. I have an enforcement order." The Petrocelli sovereign territory requires a visa for all foreign nationals entering its borders. The enforcement order is a guild document. The guild is a foreign organization. You are entering a sovereign nation. Do you have a visa? Commander Vex's eye twitched. "This is absurd. You're a dungeon. You're not a country." The Adventurers Guild Legal Department has issued a formal notification acknowledging the sovereign status of this territory. If you have a dispute with this classification, please file Form 92A with the Guild's Territorial Disputes Division. Processing time, 6 to 8 weeks. Commander Vex drew her sword. "I am not filling out a form." "Then you are entering a sovereign nation without authorization, which constitutes an act of international aggression. Per Section 9, Subsection D of the Guild Charter, any action taken against a sovereign entity without proper diplomatic authorization is classified as a war crime." Kevin paused. "I have already filed the paperwork. The Guild Legal Department has been notified. Your enforcement order has been flagged for review. Your sword is technically a foreign weapon that has not been declared at customs, which is a separate violation." Commander Vex stood at the threshold of the Petrocelli sovereign territory, her sword raised, her 50 enforcers waiting behind her, her expression caught between fury and the dawning realization that she had been outmaneuvered by a man who had been standing perfectly still for 3 weeks. She lowered her sword. "This isn't over," she said. "Correct," Kevin said. "The administrative review will take 6 to 8 weeks. We will notify you of the outcome." The raid retreated, not because they had been defeated in combat, because they had been defeated by paperwork. The system pinged. Incident log, Adventurer Incursion Number 7 status, resolved, administrative outcome assessment. Entire enforcement division retreated due to diplomatic technicalities. Reward, plus 500 experience points. Bonus, plus 50 denizen morale. The goblins are now citizens of a sovereign nation and have requested passports. Notes, the 30-day trial period is now complete. Requirements met, 7/5 incursions, for thirds floors, positive denizen morale. Dungeon C. Gerald Fitch is now a fully accredited dungeon lord. The system is baffled. The system is impressed. The system is considering a career change. Jerry read the notification. He looked at his dungeon, his strange, wonderful, sovereign, absurd dungeon. The goblins were celebrating by waving the new national flag. The commerce mimics were selling commemorative Sovereignty Day merchandise. Munch had produced a line of miniature flags, priced at 5 gold each, selling fast. Gerald Jr. was giving free tours of the newly expanded Floor 4. Mrs. Patterson was knitting a national colors scarf. Mr. Petrocelli was practicing his ambassador speech in the mirror. Sergei had added an 8th lock to his supply closet, which was now also an embassy. Kevin stood on Floor 4, in the Berkvik chamber, observing everything. His observation log now exceeded 100 pages. The entry for today read, Day 24. The dungeon is a country. The dungeon lord is a head of state. The tax department is confused. The legal department is confused. The border control department is confused. The raid has retreated. The trial period is complete. I have been named Floor 4 boss and have reviewed my employment contract, provisional, pending union ratification. I have also been issued a diplomatic passport. The passport photo is a picture of me standing still. It is a very accurate passport photo. And yet, I feel something I have not felt since the integration event. I feel seen. The squirrel, perched on Kevin's shoulder, chittered. Kevin did not respond in any visible way. But the squirrel knew. The squirrel always knew. Chapter 14, the first annual Petrocelli Arms Dungeon Festival. The festival was Jerry's idea. It was, technically, also Grubnack's idea, because Grubnak had suggested a Union Appreciation Day, with snacks and possibly a banner, and Jerry had looked at Union Appreciation Day and thought, what if we did this, but for everyone? We're inviting adventurers, Jerry said, during the planning meeting. Other dungeon seeds. The guild. Everyone. The guild tried to shut us down yesterday, Grubnak said. The guild also accidentally made us a country. They're conflicted. We should exploit that. Sending an invitation to people who want to destroy us. It's diplomacy. Mr. Petroselli's been practicing his ambassador speech for 3 days. He needs an audience. Mr. Petroselli straightened his tie. He had started wearing a tie since becoming Grand Warden and Chief Ambassador. It was a clip-on tie because real ties were complicated and he was too angry to learn how to tie one, but it was a very dignified clip-on tie. The speech, he said, is 12 pages long. It covers immigration policy, trade relations, and the importance of timely rent payments. I will deliver it with the vacuum cleaner at my side for dramatic emphasis. See, Jerry said, he's ready. The festival planning consumed the better part of a week. Marcus built the infrastructure, a stage with safety rails, an emergency evacuation route with adequate signage, and a food court with individual stall ratings for hygiene compliance. The commerce mimics handled the merchandise, commemorative mugs, miniature flags. I survived the Petroselli dungeon and had a lovely time. T-shirts, and a limited edition Gerald Jr. plush that was just a cube with googly eyes and sold for 15 gold. It was, Munch's pricing analysis indicated, the most popular item. Mrs. Patterson handled the hospitality suite. It was located in her corridor on floor 3 and featured tea, biscuits, and aggressive psychological support. If anyone needs to talk about their feelings, she announced, I am available. I will not be gentle, but I will be effective. Sergei handled security. I guard festival, he said, like I guard supplies, with conviction, and also mop. Gerald Jr. handled transportation. He had grown to 8 feet per dimension and could now carry up to 4 adventurers inside his gelatinous body simultaneously, providing a tour of the dungeon from the unique perspective of a creature who thought about cheese crackers approximately 40% of the time. The tour was called the Cube Experience. It was sold out within hours. And Kevin handled everything else. Because Kevin had been observing everything for 3 weeks, and Kevin's observation log had become the most comprehensive operational manual the dungeon had. He knew where the goblins stored their backup cheese crackers. He knew which floor tiles were loose and which ones only looked loose. He knew that the 4th torch in the eastern corridor flickered more than the others, and that this was not intentional, but nobody had reported it because everyone assumed it was atmospheric. It was not atmospheric. It was a loose wire. I have a list, Kevin said, handing Jerry a document. It was 17 pages long. It was alphabetized. Things that need attention before the festival. How long have you been working on this? Since day 1. Nobody asked. I kept working anyway. Jerry read the list. It was comprehensive. It was thorough. It was, he realized, exactly what a dungeon lord was supposed to have. An operations manager who saw everything and said nothing until the right moment. Kevin, Jerry said, would you like a promotion? I am already floor 4 boss. I mean a real promotion. Title and everything. Kevin was silent for a moment. Then, I would like the title of Dungeon Operations Director. And a nameplate. And a desk. The desk is important. I have been standing for 3 weeks. You'll get all of them. Kevin did not smile. Kevin did not outwardly react. But his observation log that evening contained a single additional line, written in slightly larger letters than usual. Day 26. I have a desk. Invitations were sent. The responses were mixed. Caliph the Ashbringer responded with a formal declaration of war, which was not an RSVP, but Jerry filed it under maybes, because he was an optimist. Forlag Karn responded with a spreadsheet analyzing the festival's expected resource consumption and a note. I will attend virtually. Please provide a data feed of attendance metrics. I am curious about your goblin satisfaction rates under festival conditions. Jerry added him to the attending list and prepared a data packet. Sister Matilda responded with a prayer and a request for a vendor booth. I would like to distribute literature about the sacred flame. I will not proselytize aggressively. I will proselytize medium. Jerry assigned her a booth between the commerce mimics and the snack table, which seemed like a good compromise. The accountant responded with a gift basket. It contained a bottle of wine from a vineyard I now own, long story, a spreadsheet of projected festival revenue, you're welcome, and a note. The franchise locations are progressing. 4 are now operational. They are very popular. You should visit one sometime. The accountant. P.S. The logo tested well in focus groups. Jerry stared at the note. For locations, he said. I never approved any locations. The accountant does not require approval, Grubnack said. The accountant requires awareness. You are now aware. I'm aware that I should be more concerned about this than I am. That's a reasonable level of concern. The accountant is a Class 5 threat. Who sent me wine? Threats can send wine. It's a spectrum. The festival opened on a Saturday morning with the weather, as much as weather existed inside a dungeon, cooperating nicely. The green torches had been dimmed to festive levels. The commerce mimics had opened their stall early and were already doing brisk business in commemorative merchandise. The goblins were wearing party hats that Glibble had made by folding napkins and writing party on them in crayon. He had learned a 5th letter, P, specifically for this purpose. Adventurers arrived in groups. Some had been to the dungeon before and were returning as tourists. Some were new, drawn by the guild's recent accreditation notice and the growing legend of the dungeon where nobody died and everyone got a coupon. Sir Reginald Thornawood III, the very first adventurer, came back, wearing the scarf Mrs. Patterson had knitted for him and carrying a loaf of sourdough bread that he had baked himself. I left the order, he told Jerry. I'm a baker now. My father is furious. I've never been happier. Melodious Max arrived with a lute that had been repaired since his last visit and performed a ballad he had written about the dungeon, titled The Cube That Ate the Complaint Box, and other tales of bureaucratic wonder. It was 15 verses long. The goblins loved it. Gerald Jr. wobbled in what might have been appreciation. Professor Quibble arrived with a copy of the Journal of Applied Magical Artifact Studies, holiday special issue, and read a paper he had published about the mug. The paper was titled Stochastic Beverage Artifacts, a preliminary classification framework. It had citations. It had footnotes. The mug, sitting on Jerry's desk in the dungeon core chamber, glowed faintly during the reading, which Jerry chose to interpret as approval. Commander Harriet Vex, the woman who had led the raid and been defeated by paperwork, arrived not as an enforcer but as a tourist, because she had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered that she had decided the only way to understand this dungeon was to experience it honestly. She rode Gerald Jr.'s Cube experience. She bought a t-shirt. She filled out a satisfaction survey. Her additional comments read, I still think you should be shut down, but the Cube ride was excellent and the t-shirt is very soft. 4 out of 5 stars. The festival's centerpiece was Mr. Petrocelli's ambassador speech. He delivered it from the stage that Marcus had built, the eternal vacuum of reckoning humming at his side, the national flag fluttering behind him. Marcus had installed a small fan for the fluttering effect. The speech was 12 pages long, as promised, and covered immigration policy. Visas will be processed within 6 to 8 weeks, or possibly never. Trade relations. The commerce mimics set their own prices. I do not interfere with the free market. And national defense. We have a vacuum cleaner and a man who can stand perfectly still for indefinite periods. We are not concerned about invasion. The audience, goblins, adventurers, residents, and one gelatinous cube, applauded. Mr. Petrocelli bowed. It was the most dignified moment of his life. I have been a landlord for 37 years, he said, after the applause subsided. I have never been thanked. Not once. Not by a tenant. Not by a plumber. Not by the city zoning board. But today he paused. His voice cracked slightly. Today someone clapped. For me. For something I did. He looked at Jerry. Thank you, he said. It was the first time he had said those words in the same conversation without immediately following them with a threat. You're welcome, Jerry said. Don't get used to it. I won't. As evening fell and the green torches burned low, Jerry sat in the dungeon core chamber, Gerald Jr. pulsing gently beside him, the mug cooling in his hands. The sounds of the festival drifted up from the floors below, goblin laughter, the clicking of commerce mimic transactions, the distant strains of melodious Max's lute, Sergei explaining to a confused adventurer why the supply closet had 9 locks now. Grubnak appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a party hat that had slipped slightly and a name tag that said, Union Steward. Compliments or complaints welcome. He sat down on the floor beside Jerry. The cube wobbled a greeting. We did it, Grubnak said. We did it, Jerry agreed. The trial period is over. The dungeon is accredited. We're a sovereign nation. The goblins have dental. The commerce mimics are filing quarterly tax returns. Gerald Jr. is a tourist attraction. Kevin has a desk. Kevin really likes the desk. I know. He told me. He used 6 words, which is 5 more than usual. They sat in silence for a moment. The cube wobbled. The mug sat on Jerry's desk, radiating the quiet energy of an artifact that was waiting for the right moment to be funny again. What happens now? Grubnak asked. Jerry looked at the system interface. It was displaying a new notification, the mid-integration update that had just been released. Patch February 3rd, 47. The patch notes were extensive. They included fixes for 17 loopholes that Jerry had been exploiting, a revision to Section 8 that closed the Petroselli leave loophole, but grandfathered in existing leave approvals, which meant Mr. Petroselli's upcoming 3-day weekend was still valid, and a new clause in Section 92 that explicitly forbade reading the terms and conditions in a manner that creates new loopholes before the system has patched the old ones. Jerry opened the patch notes. He started reading. Within 45 minutes, he had found 5 new loopholes. The system tries to patch me, he said. I find new patches. The system patches those. I find new patches. It's an arms race, but instead of arms, it's administrative procedures. And what happens when the system figures out how to stop you? The system is 40,000 years old and runs on bureaucratic logic. I am 28 years old, and I have read every terms and conditions document Apple has ever published. I'm not worried. The night grew late. The festival wound down. The commerce mimics packed up their merchandise stalls. Munch's revenue for the day, 847 gold, a new record. The Gerald Jr. plush had sold out, and there was now a waiting list. Mrs. Patterson finished her knitting and retired to her apartment, Percival the Knot Dragon dozing on her shoulder. Sergei added a 10th lock to his supply closet and fell asleep in his chair, the mop cradled in his arms like a beloved pet. Mr. Petroselli took down the flag, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer in his corner office, which Marcus had finally built, with a window that looked out onto the dungeon corridor and a nameplate that read, The Eternal Petroselli. And Kevin sat at his new desk on floor 4, in the Berkvik chamber, writing in his observation log. The Allen key, which Jerry had given him as a symbol of his new authority, sat on the desk beside him, glowing faintly. Day 28. The festival is over. The dungeon is a country. The trial period is complete. The system has tried to patch us and failed. The accountant has 4 franchise locations. I have a desk. The desk has drawers. I have put things in the drawers. I am not sure what things yet, but the drawers are ready. And yet, something is coming. I can feel it. The other dungeon seeds are watching. Caliph the Ashbringer is counting the days until the non-aggression period expires. The Adventurers Guild is confused but persistent. The system is confused but also persistent. The accountant is sending me franchise reports even though I did not ask for them and am not technically involved in the franchise. The dungeon lord, my boss, the man who gave me this desk, does not seem worried. He reads his patch notes. He drinks from the mug. He turns into a garden gnome for approximately 7 seconds and says worth it. And maybe he's right. Maybe this is what winning looks like in a world that was designed for people who kill. Maybe the most dangerous thing you can be is someone who reads the terms and conditions, fills out the forms, and never, ever stops asking questions. And maybe, just maybe, I was always meant to be the one standing still, watching, taking notes. Because when the world ends and the system activates and everyone panics, someone has to remember where the goblins keep their backup cheese crackers. Kevin closed his observation log. He looked at the Allen key. He looked at the Birkvik, its shelves glowing with the quiet light of a puzzle that had been solved but never fully understood. Tomorrow, he said to the bookshelf, we start preparing for Book 2. The Birkvik did not respond. It was a bookshelf, but the instruction booklet, still embedded in its center shelf, still glowing, pulsed once, as if in acknowledgement. In the dungeon core chamber, Jerry Fitch, dungeon lord of the Petrocelli Sovereign Territory, head of state of the accidental nation of Floor 7A, operator of the most popular dungeon on the continent, and the only person in the multiverse who had ever read both the iTunes terms and conditions and the system's 40,000-year-old bureaucratic nightmare in their entirety, picked up the mug, took a sip, and turned into a garden gnome for exactly 8 seconds. Worth it, he said. Gerald Jr. wobbled in agreement. The goblins, somewhere below, were still celebrating. The commerce mimics were counting the day's revenue. The cube was thinking about cheese crackers, specifically, cracker, festival cracker, special cracker, good cracker. Where's Jerry? Cracker, wobble. And the dungeon, strange, wonderful, sovereign, absurd, hummed with the quiet energy of a place that had been built not to destroy, but to endure. Outside, in the world beyond the Petrocelli arms, other dungeon seeds were building empires. Caliph was sharpening her blades. Forlag was optimizing his spreadsheets. The accountant was preparing the second phase of the franchise expansion. Sister Matilda was praying for everyone's souls, including Jerry's, which she had marked as priority, medium. And somewhere, in the vast and ancient machinery of the system, a semi-sentient subroutine that had been running for 40,000 years was staring at a report titled Dungeon Seed Gerald Fitch, Administrative Anomaly, Final Assessment, and experiencing what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. The system was not designed to deal with anomalies. It was designed to deal with warlords, conquerors, and dark lords. It had no protocols for a man who read the fine print, unionized his goblins, and turned a gelatinous cube into a public transportation network. But the system was learning, and so was Jerry. And somewhere in the vents, the squirrel chittered. It had been watching since day one. It had seen everything. It had notes, not as comprehensive as Kevin's, but respectable. And it knew, with the quiet certainty that only squirrels possess, that the story was only just beginning. The Indie, Book 1 of the Accidental Dungeon Lord series, Seeds Planted for Book 2, Calith's Countdown, The Accountant's Franchise Empire, Kevin's Rise, Jerry's ongoing loophole war with the system, and a squirrel with notes.